Get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about, bunches and stuff in the news. Impeaching a president in Brazil. Apple getting slapped with a huge tax bill. Wow, lots going on. Last night at the gym, focus of the evening TV schedule there on the monitors, very, very simple. It seemed to be all Trump and all Kaepernick. The sports channels were Kaepernick. The fake news on Fox, which seemed to inundate all of the TVs there, were the Trump. And what's interesting is Fox carried the Trump speech live. And they do this all the time. Every time I turn on Fox, there's Trump getting a ton of free time to do his spiel. And what I found interesting is he spent an awful lot of time of his speech in Washington State. A stadium of I think 15,000 people at this stadium. All white people. I mean, when they would when they would look at the crowd, I didn't see any black faces. But he spent, and I guess, giving Trump credit, he's trying to reach out to the black community, and really, I don't know why. His policies would be horrible for them, but actually horrible for every community. Let's make that straight. But he spent an awful lot of time talking about, how bad things are in the black community, and how the jobs aren't there, and how the education system sucks, and how, all of these horrible things. And then, with the tagline of, what do you got to lose? Your life's horrible and everything around you sucks. So, I can fix it. So vote for me. That's the outreach. That's it. But I found it interesting that the response of the people in the crowd, not overwhelming. And maybe it was just how the microphones were placed. I don't know. But when he was talking about jobs and trade and going after Hillary, uproarious. When he was talking about, we need to actually do hard work in the black community, jobs, education, investment, infrastructure, all of that stuff, not so much. And I did find it kind of telling. And I got to wonder, how, as a strategy, how that's going to work out. Because, if you watch some of the outside the Trump rally videos, these are not the kind of folks who are thrilled with black people in general. A lot of the use of the N-word, a lot of derogatory kind of comments. And, as I was at the gym, and I'm thinking, put myself in one of those seats, because I like to sit and watch what people do. I've never been, and it's a foreign concept to me, to be one of those folks who are out there screaming and going crazy. Even for someone that I support, you're never going to see me doing it. And I like to see the people who are, because good for them. It's a skill, a talent, something that I don't have in me, and good for them. But I was sitting there wondering, going, what would these people be saying? As we love Trump, yay, and all of a sudden, Trump's saying, hey, we need to help black people. Do they have a change of heart? Do they have a change of mind? Just curious. It's one of those things that just popped into my head at that moment, and then I almost choked. I'm on the elliptical and I'm chugging away, and I hear the Donald say that he's going to be a compassionate conservative, but with a really big giant heart. And I'm going, what? Did I miss something? And I literally choked. The person on the machine next to me kind of looked like, you okay? And I'm going, sorry, just can't believe what I just heard, kind of thing. And it was interesting. He then again hit on the Republican Party as the party of Lincoln frame. He threw out we're the party of freedom, equality, and opportunity. It's those nasty Democrats. They're the party of slavery, Jim Crow, and oppression. And look, he's really doing the alt-right outreach to the black community, saying, look, your life is terrible, and it's the Democrats and Hillary Clinton's fault. That's it. It's pretty simple. And I don't know if that's going to work, because the last polling numbers I saw, he has pretty close to zero support in the black community. Probably much lower than Romney, much lower than McCain, but as close to zero as you can possibly get. And it got me, just to kind of wondering. And, as I was listening to this and watching to this, you got the screens next to each other. And, on one screen, you got Trump. On the other screen, you've got the Kaepernick thing. And, to be honest, I'm kind of like, this has gotten out of hand. Because how ridiculous we have become with this. This idea that this icon, that we have to give absolute respect and credence to this icon is kind of ludicrous to me. And I've read so many pieces, and people have sent me so many stories of, this veteran wrote this and this guy wrote this. And Jabbar had a good point. There was an Army veteran had a really good point. And it's simply that, you fight for freedom. You fight for freedom of speech. You fight for liberty and all of those things, not so that everyone has to conform. So that if you don't want to stand, you have the freedom to do that. And now, look, it wouldn't be a protest that I would do. To be honest, I wouldn't. It's not my thing. But I absolutely respect someone's ability to do that. I may not be in favor of it, but that is their right. And all of the nonsense that we've heard, and it's crazy. As Brian sent me this email with a story from North Korea, who said, this is what happens in places that don't have freedom. We have freedom. And it's a story of Kim Jong-un evidently decided that, one of his cabinet ministers fell asleep. Who knows why? Who knows why he fell asleep? Medical condition. But evidently he's the vice premier for education. His name was Kim Yong-jin. And he was executed for the crime of falling asleep, because it showed disrespect for the head honcho there. Also, there are two other senior officials who have been banished. I don't quite know what banished means in North Korea. I'm assuming that is not a good thing. But as they've said, as the article said, they have been agitators. They have been anti-party, anti-revolutionary agitators. So yeah, that's the other side of this. So when I look at the Kaepernick thing, I go, you've got the opposite ends. You've got the ability, say, do what you want, and you're going to have people who are going to support you or not. That's fine. Or you absolutely snap into line, and regardless of what your belief is, regardless of your thoughts, your comments, any of that, you have to fall in line. And the question then becomes, what kind of a country do we want? I look at the Trump people, And as I was watching the videos, and there you see some of the outside streams and stuff, these folks seem to be the worst of humanity. And I don't say that lightly. These are the people that you don't want in your neighborhood. These are people you don't want to invite to your party. These are the fringe. These are the way out kind of, wow, how did you get so crazy? They're the ones who would be absolutely okay with, let's go take Kaepernick and out to the firing squad. He's un-American. Without really understanding that what he is doing is absolutely American. And as I said, it's not something I would do. It's not. I wouldn't burn the flag. I wouldn't do any of that stuff. But I understand it. And at the end of it, that's what freedom is about. Like it or not, you have the right to do what you want to do. As long as it doesn't infringe on my right to do what I want to do, you got that right. And that's what freedom's about. So as I see this stuff and as it keeps popping up, I'm just stunned that, the very forces and the very folks who talk about their love of liberty and freedom are the first ones in line to, when you do something that they don't like, that they slap you down. Just amazing stuff. Interested in your thoughts? Rick at the ricksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back and talk about the voting hacking, is it something that's important? Is this really going on? What do we do? How do we return to security if we need to? Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to the Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day the Battle of Blair Mountain raged in Logan County, West Virginia. Members of the United Mine Workers of America were attempting to organize the minefields in the southern part of the state. The efforts to bring workers to union was met with violent resistance. The miners armed themselves and marched south. As many as 10,000 miners joined the march. They met armed company men at Blair Mountain. In the battle that ensued, 1 million rounds were fired. The mine owners even hired private planes to drop bombs on Union miners. The U.S. Army intervened and the battle ended. Despite not being successful in their march, the bloody battle brought national attention to the violence in the coal fields. But that was not the last battle for Blair Mountain. In 2011, there was a proposal to bring mountaintop removal mining to Blair Mountain. This type of mining blasts off large chunks of a mountain surface to get at the coal seams below. Protesters stood against the proposal. They argued it would be environmentally devastating to the area. They also argued that it would blast away one of the most important sites of labor history in the nation. Some coal miners took exception to the protests. In a CNN documentary on the conflict, one union miner said, quote, "Mountaintop removal is what built this house, sends that little girl to school, provides insurance for my wife." But another miner joined in the protest against removal. He told CNN that miners had been, quote, brainwashed to think, oh, I can't have a job unless it's a mountaintop removal job. In 2014, the state prohibited surface mining at Blair Mountain. For now, but that is subject to change. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Jordan Wilhelmy. Fox News host Martha McCallum defended Donald Trump surrogate Pastor Mark Burns against criticism for his offensive tweet of a cartoon Hillary Clinton in blackface.
There are definitely channels and places in this country where you, sir, are not allowed to speak your mind as a member of the black community who is supporting Donald Trump. They have written you off, and they've decided that anything you have to say is not worthwhile despite your years of experience and your own personal experience.
However, on MSNBC, The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson questioned the pastor's message.
When you talk about African Americans in the pastor's lexicon, living under Democratic rule. Well, in fact, a big chunk of the Democratic Party is African Americans who are elected officials at every level, including President of the United States.
This isn't the first time Burns has used inflammatory rhetoric as a surrogate for Trump. He has also pushed a conspiracy theory claiming Planned Parenthood has racist motivations and argued that Trump won't allow businesses to continue to, quote, rape America. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Standing tall against a multinational corporate agenda. The Rick Smith Show.
All the things you want are real. You have you to complete, and there is no deal.
So the other day, you may remember, we talked about the flash alert coming out of the FBI's cyber division, where they said, look, we've got heightened concerns here in the U.S. of the possibility of cyber intrusions by Russian state-sponsored hackers. And the fear is that they're going to disrupt the November elections. There had been some stories potentially of there being hacks in Illinois and Arizona. And you begin to start thinking about, are these just stories to set us up to think that our ballot box is not secure, or are these real actual threats? Here to talk a little bit about it, I've asked our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson, to come talk with us. Erwin, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be here again, Rick. How are you all?
I am good. So I look at this flash alert. Is this the canary in the coal mine, or is this something to distract us?
Well, I don't think it's something to distract us, and I think it's something about which we should be concerned. But at the same time, I don't think that we should be overwhelmingly focused on this. We should be focusing on voter protection as opposed to this commercial fraud potential. It's interesting. I was commenting in a forum in which I was involved a couple of days ago with a handful of my colleagues from around the country who work together. We work as a team nationally on voter protection issues, particularly on behalf of the labor movement and in protecting and assuring the right to vote for working people and their families in this country. And I observed in that context that in 1789, we didn't have an issue about voting machines being hacked, about the outcome of elections being manipulated by foreign governments, about people's votes not counting. And here we are with all of our technological process and progress advanced over these 240-odd years of our existence as a country. And those sometimes less than completely convenient, sometimes time-consuming counts of paper ballots have very frequently been replaced by electronic voting machine devices that are sold by not people and companies that are aimed and organized for the purpose of protecting our democracy, but instead organized to make a profit. And they sell these electronic voting devices, and in states like Pennsylvania, every single county is different from every other one of the 66 counties. All election administration is done at the county level. And one of the things that these purveyors of electronic voting machines and electronic voting systems tell us that we now should suspect and expect and count on is that there will be some slippage, some what they refer to as breakage, anomalies of inaccuracy, some level of inaccuracy that we should accept in our elections because of the flaws in their system and their machines. So we get an inaccurate result very rapidly instead of an accurate result with a simple paper ballot, and it's very, very frustrating. Now, as you alluded to, we're being advised by no less than our FBI that the potential exists that the same people who are stealing our credit card numbers and reselling them, or are hacking into critical systems around the United States and holding them for ransom, may be capable of swooping in through the cloud and manipulating the outcome of the election, that these profiteers have found a new path for making money by selling to local governments these machines that are not secure. So while I'm not overwhelmingly worried about it, I am somewhat concerned about the curiosity to me that technology in 1789 was somehow more secure than it is today.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of it, with today's technology, we should be at least able to emulate what we were able to do in the past. And it seems to me that, you know, like here in Pennsylvania, we've got these DREs, these direct recording electronic voting machines that have no paper ballot, have no paper trail whatsoever. And it would seem to me that just common sense would say that there should be.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And somehow or another, we have governmental agencies that tell us that it would be compromising for people to be able to vote, to exercise their franchise from their home computers that could generate such a record and that do have some security, but that if they have to go on one cold and damp day in November for only a 13-hour period to a polling place that is insecure and cast their ballots on a machine that in many instances, depending upon who the manufacturer is, has no backup, no paper trail, no security whatsoever, and that's somehow better. And then we get even more. Everybody in Pennsylvania, whether one is in Clearfield County or in Pike County, in Philadelphia County or in Erie County, in Allegheny County or in Luzerne County, is going to be voting for the same presidential candidates, the same statewide candidates for Senator of the United States, for State Treasurer, for Attorney General, for Auditor General. But if one goes to vote in any one of those counties that I just mentioned, and then later in the day looked at a machine in another county, they would see that the machine is totally different, its operations are different. Even the way the candidates are set up and arrayed on the ballots are different. The first name on the ballot is in the far left, and the next one is immediately to its right, and so on. They read left to right. Still others, the first one is in the top left, and the next one is immediately below it. So there's no way for people who are concerned about monitoring election security and vitality, there's no way to really monitor it statewide without knowing every machine in every county. And we get to places like Allegheny and Philadelphia County. Within the county, there are different machines in different precincts in Allegheny County or divisions in Philadelphia County because they were purchased from different vendors at different times. So what we have here in Pennsylvania instead is a practical reality. The practical reality is that in the face of these concerns that I can articulate reasonably well, the General Assembly a couple of years ago decided to pass a voter ID law requiring everybody to produce a government-issue photo ID in order to be able to exercise their franchise, even if they've been registered to vote for not years, not even decades, but significant portions of a century. Fortunately, we struck that law down in court, but that was the focus of our General Assembly when these other issues are there and real and meaningful and could be compromising the outcome of elections. So, and now we need to season that with one more thing. We've heard the Trumpers announcing to the world that Pennsylvania, among other states, but particularly Pennsylvania, is going to be rigged, that indeed if Trump does not win Pennsylvania, the only possible reason is that because the election is rigged. And so those of us on the voter protection legal detail have been looking into that because we realize that Pennsylvania is ground zero. And the Trump files are recruiting people to be engaged in the electoral process at what sounds to be a fairly ugly level. We hear, for example, that since Pennsylvania is what's known as an open carry state in 66 of our 67 counties, one can perfectly legally carry a sidearm loaded and ready to go without a permit, without a specialized carry permit, as long as it's exposed. It's open carry. And the only place in the state where that is not permitted is in Philadelphia County. The other 66 counties all permit it as a matter of state law. We're concerned that people on the Trump side of the equation are going to be showing up to polling places wearing a gun and intimidating voters, particularly people of color, young people, senior citizens, new first-time voters, people who don't have English as their first and primary language, and the LGBT community. And we're so concerned about it that it has become part of the focus of our voter protection efforts for this coming election cycle. That's not to be confused with other things that we've seen over many, many years, like a couple of young, tall, dark-suited white guys with sunglasses and something that appears to be a radio in one ear, standing outside of polling places in African-American neighborhoods, just intimidating people from exercising their franchise. So we have real voter protection and vote integrity issues, and our General Assembly could only muster the support to do one, and that one was stricken as unconstitutional. And that was to compel people to produce a photo ID issued by a government agency. And I might add that we've only been able to find in 240 years 37 cases of voter identification fraud that were claimed, and of those, the vast majority were not prosecuted, and they weren't prosecuted because they were found to be without merit.
Because you had there's probably something of an error at the polling place where
yes.
They put the wrong name down.
Yep. Exactly right.
In looking at this uniformity problem, because I've talked about this in the past as well, as you pointed out, every county is different, and in most of the counties it's different as well. Why is that we don't have a set of standards by which each county has to follow?
Well, the accurate and direct answer is it's because state law doesn't provide for it. That we don't have a uniform election administration facility in Pennsylvania. So the lawyer answer is because there's no law and no regulatory framework in place that compels that. And the General Assembly could pass such a law if they chose to, and the Pennsylvania Department of State Bureau of Elections could then implement regulations that implemented such a law. But that hasn't happened. The frank reality is the cynic in me suggests that this is grounded in the same forms of sort of latent or unspoken racism and misogyny, sexism, and discriminatory intent that is the basis for us having 500 school districts in Pennsylvania, where we have artificial boundaries that keep children from having real school choice, because a child, for example, that lives in Harrisburg can't go to school a bridge away, less than a mile away in Camp Hill. And a child that lives in Susquehanna Township can't go to school in the Central Dauphin School District, which is literally a stone's throw away from some neighborhoods. And the children in the Pittsburgh School District can't go to school in the Mount Lebanon School District, which is spitting distance. And children in the Philadelphia School District can't go to school in Montgomery County or in Lower Merion or in Central Bucks County or in somewhere in Chester County or somewhere in Delaware County like Radnor, because we have these artificial lines that were drawn to perpetuate de facto segregation. And I think that the election code delegating these kinds of things to the counties is very much the same way. It's arcane and it is indefensible and inexplicable, and we're about to get into another huge, major election cycle in which this lack of legislative attention for the public good has been ignored, and instead we face a legislature that deals with things like stealing elections through voter identification law.
Yeah, instead of actually doing something that would be helpful. So let me ask you, you mentioned something about a minute ago about people voting from their home computers. Are you in favor of internet voting?
Well, I'm in favor of us taking a really good hard look at the reality. We vote, with the exception that we've talked about in today's conversation, of changing things from paper ballots to these machines, these electronic voting. We vote essentially in the same fashion today as we did in 1789, and we certainly don't bank that way, and we certainly don't go to libraries that way. We certainly don't put letters in post that way. We don't go to work that way. We don't come home from work that way, and we don't eat that way. So for some reason, in Pennsylvania at least, we have no such thing as early voting. We are restricted in our access to absentee ballots to people having to certify that either they are too ill to come to the polling place on Election Day, or that their work or other obligations keep them from being able to be within 25 miles of their voting precinct on Election Day. And then we say that the election has to take place on a chilly day in November over a period between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m., and that's it. And that's how we're going to pick no less than the President of the United States of America. That's how we're going to select who will be our United States Senator, who will be the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, who will be our congressman or woman, and who will be our state senator and state representative, who will be our mayors and city council members and county commissioners and school directors. And it makes no sense. We do so many other things online. We need to at least take a look at the idea of being able to vote from home, from the comfort of our home, during a period of time that's more rational than those 13 hours in a cold day in November. Because what that does is exactly the opposite of what our founding fathers must have had in mind. That suppresses voting, and we don't have any interest in suppressing voting. We have an interest in recognizing that it's an awesome responsibility, but a special right as well. And our obligation ought to be to make it more convenient, not less. Within reason, of course, not so that elections are compromised, not so that the law is broken, not so that fraud would be encouraged, but there is no fraud in voting. I mean, the reality is that prosecutions for voter fraud are all but non-existent. So we need to look at systems that make voting convenient, because we have had, as a function of percentage, a huge drop-off in participation in the system, and that's exactly the way the politicians like it. But they're the same politicians, of course, who get to determine how elections are run in our state. So we need to maybe take a look at this with a special commission, a citizens commission that is aimed at assuring that people have the capacity to exercise their voting rights, their franchise, right, instead of finding methods by which to suppress votes, whether it's through voter ID laws or through having an election on a cold day in November and compelling people to travel in every instance many blocks, and in most instances many miles, in order to exercise their right to vote.
Right. The reason I ask is last week we had spent a good bit of time talking about internet voting with the folks from Common Cause and the Electronic Privacy Information Center, and because we're beginning to do some of that with the military, with folks who are in harm's way overseas. And, part of the concern is voter security, is voter secrecy, aside from the security issues, the hacking and all of that. But the secrecy part of the ballot, it was part of their big concern.
Well, I think that it's a concern, but if we have found a way in general to pay our utility bills from the computer, to pay our credit card bills from the computer, to do our banking on our home computers, to communicate with our family members who are sometimes thousands and thousands of miles away from us through the computer, there needs to be a way. It cannot be that it's incapable of security. And remember, I've already described to you not merely the security of hacking that you have alluded to, that we need to be concerned about in terms of its gross impact on outcomes. We need to remember what I said at the front end of this conversation. The manufacturers and distributors and purveyors of these electronic voting machines tell us that inherently in the machines is some dimension of inaccuracy. So they have made a decision that it's not worth their while to make them more accurate. It's not that they don't have the technology. They've made a decision. We have recently in the United States made a change in how we handle credits without concern. I think that it is with due concern. I don't think that there is a whole lot of articulable secrecy and security in the systems we have now that we are compelled to use because a vendor sold them to a county commissioner on some day over dinner somewhere. We need to deal with more important things, like we ought to be allowed to register to vote on the same day as Election Day. We don't need that extra month, that extra 30 days to process voter registrations anymore because we do it all on high-speed database technology equipment. So why shouldn't we be allowed to register to vote up to and including on Election Day?
Right.
What do we do about primary elections versus general elections? How do we handle those kinds of things? May we be able to vote from home or from some other convenient place? Could we have early voting in Pennsylvania as they do in places like Ohio and in Florida? Could we have a less restrictive absentee ballot facility so that we don't have to claim that we're sick or away working in order to get an absentee ballot? Why is it that the people who run these systems get to dictate when we citizens are permitted to exercise the right by which we choose those public officials?
Excellent point. And something I'm sure we will talk about in the coming weeks as we run up to the November elections. Erwin, I appreciate your thoughts. I appreciate you taking some time for us.
Good to be here, Rick. Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you and hearing you next week.
All right. Good stuff. Our good friend, attorney Erwin Aronson. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Damn for a moment, but I always go back. It's time for war. It's time for war. It's time for war. It's time for war.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
You asked what the issue is. There's too many to list.
The Standing Rock Sioux tribe takes a stand against massive new oil pipeline.
Environmentalists, lawmakers, and oil and gas companies fought tooth and nail over this one. In the end, Governor Jerry Brown got his way.
California passes most sweeping climate change law yet. Evacuations in West Virginia after leak of deadly chlorine gas. Plus, Obama creates the world's largest protected marine sanctuary.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We didn't cover this story about the floods until it became political either.
I told you Fox News was going to go down the tubes as soon as Roger Ailes left. Admitting an error on air? What the Fox? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, this fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's sort of becoming the new Keystone XL pipeline fight, it seems, up in North Dakota.
Oh, yes, it most certainly is. Up in North Dakota, thousands of Native Americans and others have gathered in peaceful protest to support the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in an attempt to stop construction of the $4 billion Dakota Access Pipeline because it threatens ancient sacred sites and will cross the Missouri River just upriver of their reservation, where any spill would contaminate their primary water supply. In an extended interview on the Bradcast, Standing Rock Sioux Chairman David Archambault called the pipeline an unacceptable threat.
We have to look after the kids that are not even here yet. So what we're really doing is we're talking for our ancestors who are no longer here and can't speak, and we're talking for those those children who are not even born yet from our nation.
The tribe is also suing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for lack of meaningful consultation. The Corps had required the pipeline route to be moved away from the city of Bismarck's water supply, but approved it near the Standing Rock Sioux water supply because a spill there would impact fewer people.
Yeah, just a few Indians. What do they care?
The tribe has asked a federal judge to approve an injunction to stop construction on the pipeline. In West Virginia, a leak of toxic chlorine gas on Saturday forced the evacuation of 2 communities after a bright green cloud of the deadly gas leaked from a rail car at the Axiall chemical plant located nearby. 2 employees and 5 residents required medical treatment. No cause has been determined yet, but the Charleston Gazette reports that the Axiall chemical plant has a history of significant safety problems, including an incident in 2014 in which an employee was killed. In California, a major victory for climate action. After a very tough fight, the state legislature passed a major expansion to California's landmark climate law. The original 2006 law required the state to cut emissions down to 1990 levels. It's worked so well that California's already met that target. The law was set to expire in 2020, so instead, the state legislature's Democratic majority extended the law to 2030 and increased the goal with a new, more ambitious target of lowering emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Governor Jerry Brown called it a major victory.
There are a lot of Trump-inspired acolytes that even walk the halls of this state capitol. But they have been vanquished, and vanquished in a very solid way because of the people standing behind them. So bring it on. We'll have more battles, and we'll have more victories.
Of course, by victories, Jerry Brown means putting people out of work and crippling the economy like we have out here in California. Oh, wait, where we've got a surplus and we've got more jobs than ever, and never mind.
The California State Legislature also passed a joint resolution urging the federal government to pass a revenue-neutral carbon tax, requiring polluters to pay for the cost of their pollution, with 100% of the revenue returned to households. Probably won't see any of that anytime soon in Congress.
The U.S. Congress?
Yes.
No, we won't.
But for the record, The Guardian reports that studies of similar carbon tax mechanisms in other countries have shown that a price on carbon emissions has a modest beneficial impact on their economies.
That's a foreign newspaper. They don't read those in Congress.
Finally, some more good news. In Iowa, the State Utilities Board has approved a wind turbine project that it says will be the nation's largest wind energy project. And in Hawaii, on the heels of designating the nation's newest national monument in Maine, President Obama over the weekend also created the largest ocean sanctuary in the world off the northwestern coast of the Hawaiian Islands. He expanded the existing Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument to 4 times its size, protecting 500,000 square miles of land and sea and prohibiting all commercial extraction activities.
I'm just impressed you were able to say that name.
Me too.
For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on gold.
Donnie Trump, what a maverick, what a shake-em-up outsider, what an anti-establishment fighter for working stiffs. Oh, and don't forget this, what a phony. The Donald sounds like a populist on the stump, bellowing that the system has been jerry-rigged by and for the corporate and political elites, which is killing the middle class. Well, he's right about that. But what'll he do about it? I'll fix it, he barks. I'll make the system honest again. Trust me. As Groucho Marx said, to know if a man is honest, ask him. If he says he is, he's a crook. Or, in the case of this phony populist, you could look at the specific fixes he's proposing in his blueprint for the, quote, economic renewal of America's working class. Trump's idea of working class turns out to be millionaires and billionaires, for that's who would get the bulk of benefits from his agenda. In his blustery speeches, he assails corporations that are offshoring and outsourcing American jobs, charging them with knocking down middle-income families and devastating working-class cities. But then he turns around and rewards them. His proposed tax cuts, for example, don't benefit low-wage workers at all and provide only a pittance of gain for those with middle-class paychecks. But corporations are given a huge windfall with a nearly 60% cut in their tax rate. This giveaway will also take $240 billion a year out of our public treasury, money desperately needed for such basics as expanding educational opportunities and restoring our nation's dilapidated infrastructure. This is Jim Hightower saying, what we have here is the same old failed elitist hokum that Republicans have been peddling for decades, only his is delivered with more bombast. Rhetoric aside, Trump's plan is to replace Ronald Reagan's trickle-down theory with his own anti-worker scheme of tinkle-down economics.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Fort Lauderdale to Santa Clara. It sounds like a pretty straightforward JetBlue flight, right? Think again. The Fort Lauderdale is the one you know in South Florida. Santa Clara, that's Cuba. And Wednesday's flight happened to be the first ever direct, regularly scheduled commercial flight between the two countries. Charter flights have long been allowed for Americans fitting into one of several special travel categories, but direct commercial flights are a brand new thing enabled by a recent warming of relations. Silver Airlines and American Airlines will begin direct flights to Cuba next month. The Islamic State's number 2 man is dead. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani was reportedly killed by coalition airstrikes in Syria, the terror group admitted this week. The American and Turkish air forces have been operating in the area of northern Syria, where he reportedly died of injuries. Adnani is believed to have led the Islamic State's propaganda efforts and played a substantial role in organizing attacks outside Iraq and Syria. Several weeks ago, it was reported in the British press that the two ministries tasked with formally removing Britain from EU treaties and crafting their replacements were understaffed and not experienced enough for the job. Those challenges meant the Brexit might not be finalized until 2019 or 2020. Well, Prime Minister Theresa May summoned her cabinet on Wednesday to make sure one thing was clear. Britain's split with the EU is still on. May is reportedly standing by an earlier pledge to not trigger the formal withdrawal process from the EU until early next year, the logic being that the extra months between now and then would allow British officials to devise the most lucrative terms possible for Britain's divorce. This Brexit Band-Aid is not coming off quickly. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Interesting story coming out of Georgia. And again, you look at all of these stories coming up about how different election officials and the kind of hacking that's going on. And it gets me back to thinking, is there really something going on? Or is this just a way to get us to think that the ballot box is not trustworthy? And this has been one of those things we've heard a lot of from fringe elements for a very long time. But, every time you're turning around now, you're seeing data being taken. You're seeing voter names and all kinds of information being hacked, or in this case, given away. Georgia has, like Pennsylvania, these DREs, and it's paperless voting. We have no idea. And aside from the reality for me is it's insane that we would have even started this. Because, if I were to go to the ATM and it not spit out a receipt, I'm going, why? I want to have something to where I go, yeah, that's what I did. That makes sense to me. The idea of casting your ballot and having the machine count them, but having a little piece of paper spit out, and you take that piece of paper and you drop it into a box right there. right there. Just put it right there while you're still in the booth. There's nobody there. Just right into that's the vote. The thing that you do on the screen, that's just to tell you that you voted, and it's the quick counter. At the end of it, the paper is the actual ballot, and the paper is what's actually counted. So while the machine may go, the vote was this, it's the paper count that counts. That seems sane and rational to me. And I would say open up voting for a weekend, not on a Tuesday. Open it up for an entire weekend. Start Friday afternoon, go all the way through until Tuesday evening. That whole span of time. And as a country, say, we're going to pay poll watchers to be there during those hours. And it's that important that we're going to make sure that there are folks there and available, and that the polls are going to be open, and that we encourage more people to come out and vote. But I look at Georgia. Evidently, Georgia had about 6 million voters' information exposed to a data breach because of the Republican Secretary of State Brian Kemp's office. And as I understand it, this is one of those things where you go, your office accidentally mailed out about a dozen discs of private information to more than 6 million voters, their social security number, their birth dates, their driver's license numbers, their addresses, all of that stuff. Outside of the fact that you've given voter information away, how much identity theft could happen with that kind of information? Now, at the time, it was reported that Kemp told state lawmakers that while he was no expert on data security, was pretty confident that no information made it out to the, quote, bad guys. Now, look, this office has had problems. Just a year before that, they had about tens of thousands of new voter registrations that just went missing. Just somehow they ended up missing. Not sure where they happened. Just coincidentally, just happened to be the majority of them were people from low income areas. They just happened to be people of color. It just was oops. It happens. And for me, I look at these machines, and look, I just voted in the primary here in Pennsylvania not too long ago, and I walked in, and again, I questioned the person who was taking me over to the little machine that has no verifiable paper trail. And I went through and I did my little ballot, and I wished and I hoped and that it's counted and it's right and it didn't flip and do some of the things that the insanity that we've seen. But I look at the Georgia machines, evidently, the ones with no paper trail, they're still using Windows 2000 technology. And cyber experts are saying, look, you're just sitting ducks for hackers to come and hack into these systems. And I look at this, and at some point, don't we have to say this is the real problem? We spent so much time, so much energy, and look, I can't tell you how many hours on this program we talked about voter ID. I am not against identifying who a voter is. The problem that I had with voter ID in this state were the limited number of verifying identifications. Used to be if you got an electric bill, you got something that had your name on it and your address on it, that was enough, and that it was a bar that any person could meet. You didn't have to go get a special license. For my grandmother, for instance, when she was alive, she didn't have to go get a special state ID because her driver's license she still had, but it had expired. I think her license expired in 2000, and it was expired. But she kept it for identification purposes, for cashing checks and doing all kinds of other things. But you can't use it for voting. It's expired. Sorry. And for me, the fact that she got a credit card bill in the mail, that should have been enough. It's got her name on it. It is what it is. And I find it interesting that there was a study done by the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism there in Arizona. And since 2000, this is one of those things that's just kind of shocking. Since 2000, and understand the state of Pennsylvania in their stipulation of fact at the beginning of the trial against voter suppression, the voter ID law here in Pennsylvania, they admitted that there had never been any cases that they knew of. They hadn't prosecuted any, and there was none. They're out of the Cronkite School of Journalism in Arizona. They did this study, and they found just 10 proven cases of voter impersonation fraud since 2000. You're talking about over 146 million votes being cast, and they were able to find 10 proven cases. 10. And you go, we spent all that time, all that energy, all that work, all that stuff pursuing that to stop 10. And now look, I know every vote counts and every vote matters, all of that. Yes, I agree. But to put all of the time, energy, and effort into that while not paying attention to the glaring errors and the glaring problems that we have with our machines kind of sends an interesting message. And that interesting message is we want to make sure that we hold the vote down. We want to make sure that, as Mike Turzai said, voter ID done, going to help Romney win the state of Pennsylvania. That was the intent. It was not about good voting practices. It was not about how do we get more people to the polls. It was about holding that down. Something we got to deal with. We'll take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I didn't go to boarding schools. Preppy girls never looked at me. Why should they? I ain't nobody got nothing in my pocket. Beverly Hills, that's where I want to be.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. At the Wisconsin AFL-CIO Conference in Madison, AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Shuler said that Labor's political effort in the elections is strong, and not just in the top battleground states.
I think the effort is going well. It's strong. We have certainly Tier 1 states that we're focusing more effort on, but we have a campaign and a plan that's really going to be implemented nationwide, making sure that we get the information out to union members and communities of working class voters so that people know where the candidates stand on the issues that are important to working families. We are going to remain steadfast and dogged and make sure that we get the information in the hands of every working person and get them to the polls.
Shuler says that Trump's rhetoric can play well at first glance to some workers, but Labor can blunt that appeal by making sure that workers know about Trump's anti-worker actions and positions.
Trump has some great ads on TV, and certainly the issues around trade resonate with working class voters, but what he says and what he does are two different things. He has been quoted saying wages are too high. He's been quoted as saying that he loves right to work. He makes his own products in countries overseas that are paying pennies on the dollar. So I think what he does and what he says really aren't consistent, and we need to make sure people know that and aren't romanced by the rhetoric.
The University of California's San Francisco Medical Center has agreed to rehire 24 former minimum wage contract custodians and give them raises after a public outcry. And instead of contract workers, they will be UCSF employees. Mostly Chinese immigrants, the workers were fired after speaking up for better working conditions. UCSF had demanded that the contractor cut the workers' wages. The workers resisted, and after a 2-year public struggle, UCSF is rehiring them at $17.52 an hour with health care and retirement benefits. California's Public Employment Relations Board had issued a complaint against UCSF for illegal retaliation against the workers. Culinary Workers Union Local 226 has a new website warning the traveling public about the labor dispute at Trump Hotel Las Vegas. www.vegastravelalert.org/Trump will educate and inform about the refusal of Donald Trump and fellow billionaire co-owner Philip Ruffin to negotiate a fair union contract for Trump Hotel Las Vegas workers. The culinary workers say that 57,000 other casino workers in Vegas have fair wages, job security, and good health benefits with union contracts, in stark contrast to Trump. employees.
Brought to you in part by the Alliance for American Manufacturing, working to build coalitions between business, labor, legislators, and activists. Information about our mission to strengthen American manufacturing and rebuild the middle class through smart public policy is available online at americanmanufacturing.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
The man who sends the investor class diving for their tax shelters. Vic Smith.
Yes, run for the tax shelters. Big story with the EU slapping Apple with this massive tax bill, $14.6 billion, and good on them. Maybe we should take something. Maybe we should take something of a lesson on this and start issuing our own tax bills. Far too long we've been letting these big companies get away with it. And our quote of the day comes from a guy named Edward Kleinbard. He is a professor of I guess tax law there at USC Gould School of Law. He said Apple invests as much in tax avoidance technologies as it does in its industrial design. That, to me, speaks volumes about how important this issue is, which is why we've asked our good friend Mateus Venango to come talk with us, professor of economics there at Bucknell University, also fantastic blogger over at nakedkeynesianism.blogspot.com. Mateus, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So this is a huge deal. I mean, this $14.6 billion bill seems to be, to me, a big deal.
Yeah, well, it also says that the European Union is not willing to accept tax havens, and that there might be some movement, has been for a while, on trying to curtail on the ability of corporations to evade taxes. So, they caught Apple, but this is true of almost, you can name it. Ireland has been part of those issues from before. Google, Facebook, you can count all of them do what you just suggested. They invest in not paying taxes. It also, says something about the U.S. government, I should say. Mr. Obama has sort of complained the U.S. government is not happy, which I think it's interesting, given that they should, we should be happy with this sort of stuff. We should be trying to make corporations pay taxes, after all. So I think that this is very revealing of what we've been doing in the U.S. too.
So the question I have then, will Apple pay it, do you think?
Oh, well, I don't know if, they obviously have lawyers and, they certainly can. I'm sure that there are legal ways of prolonging this thing and trying to avoid it. If they do pay, I can guarantee you that they're going to get some sort of discount on their taxes in the U.S. So
we're going to be the ones footing the bill then.
Exactly. So I'm pretty sure that's what goes on. I mean, part of the right wing sort of lunatic fringe keeps saying that the U.S. corporate taxes are too high, and that's part of our problems and why we're outsourcing jobs and this, that, and the other. But while nominally the corporate taxes are actually high in comparison to other developed economies, they're actually quite low in effective terms. So the U.S. gives several corporations pay basically not, which is, by the way, it's what Apple was doing in Ireland. They were paying basically, some years it was zero taxes. So they do that over here too. So, and a simple way of doing it in this respect, I'm not sure. There might be some sort of loophole that allows them to do that, but I'm pretty sure if there isn't, they'll find some sort of way of suggesting, look, we're paying all of these taxes over there, so give us a break over here.
Right.
And
but here's the thing:
certainly we'll do it on the basis of we have to stimulate jobs and whatever.
Exactly, and this is where the frame is, because I remember the conversation around Ireland moving towards this kind of tax haven status because they believed it was going to bring all of those jobs there. They thought, the Googles and the Apples and everyone was going to, bring headquarters and jobs by the thousands there. And it turns out in this Apple case, they brought absolutely no jobs to Ireland at all.
No, that's the typical story of the tax haven thing, and with that criteria, I don't know, the Cayman Islands would be the most prosperous country in the world for workers. Everybody should be working in the Cayman Islands or some other tax haven. It's a flawed model. It's part of something that has sort of cost not just workers, but I think the capitalist system, the ability to grow at decent levels. So I think that the model over the last 30 years, we can bring it back to Reagan or to some extent to Carter too, but to this last 30-something years in which we decided to favor corporations. The notion is that you have to favor corporations with lower taxes, with deregulation, because they're, to some extent you can think of job creators, and that if you favor workers, you'll be in trouble because, corporations with a more globalized economy will go somewhere else. And the problem with that is that wages have stagnated. There's not enough demand in many cases for basic stuff, and so the economy is not growing, and it's a global problem.
No, I mean, demand is
down this stagnation. So it's a failed model.
Absolutely,
it's a failed model, and tax havens are one of the several elements. We've talked in your program on several others, bashing unions, this, that, and the other, but this is part of the problem. It's one of the important instruments to keep wages and workers in line.
But here's the thing, I look at this statement by this Edward Kleinbart guy who says, look, they invest as much money in avoiding paying taxes as they do in their product, which is an enormous statement. But, I go back to, it doesn't matter how low the rate is, they're still going to try, unless it's zero, and then they'll probably be using money to try and get us to pay them. It doesn't matter how low the rate is; they're still going to not pay taxes. And at some point, you have to have that body that's going to say, in order to participate and play in our sandbox, you got to chip in.
Yeah, no, that's why I said that it's important what the EU has done. So the EU basically had superseded Irish rules and said, I don't care what Ireland says, we have precedence over this. These guys have to go and pay not just the 14.6 or whatever it is, the right number, but interest also on all of this. And what's problematic for me is that democratic government, goes and says, oh, no, the EU shouldn't be doing this. No, that's exactly what they should be doing. And actually, the U.S. should be cracking together with the EU, cracking tax havens. This shouldn't be allowed to happen. Countries that behave in this way should not be allowed at the table. This hurts everybody. And so, it's part of the problem, and so I'm glad that the European Union, and you can think on other things, and on competition too. The EU has been harsher on Microsoft and on Google. They have tried to at least curb a little bit the power of corporations, which is not the case over here.
Yeah, I mean, and I look at all of the anger and all of the fervor in this election cycle around our trade policies and around globalization and all of that. And to me, focusing on these multinational companies is, in my view, one of the things that should be front and center, and pursuing more deregulation and more lower tax rates doesn't seem to be where we should be going. But, I was watching the Trump rally last night, and boy, they were on the deregulate and tax cut bandwagon.
Oh, yeah, no, these things have not changed. And as you said also, I should say, trade treaties have for a long while been essentially about giving power to corporations. They're legal contracts that allow corporations to do essentially whatever they want. They have exorbitant powers in terms of patents, royalties, in their ability to take governments and people to court in particular districts in which they are known to be favored, and so on and so forth. So that's essentially what all of this is about. So that's the reason why, when people think, oh, NAFTA, it certainly hurted American workers, but it hurted also to a great extent Mexican workers. So, who benefited from this? Essentially corporations and wealthy individuals in, both U.S. and Mexico.
Right.
So that's what free trade agreements are. That's what the more evidently and more nakedly in the case of Republican politics you have in terms of their policies. It's a repetition of the same stuff going back to the 1970s, to supply side economics, to simply tax cuts for the very wealthy, and that will trickle down, or something along those lines. And the notion is, in that respect, very much the same as with this tax haven sort of problem. The idea that you have to do everything to bring the confidence of the job creators and the corporations and so on and so forth. Again, that has not been the case. So the period in which the economies of the world, it's not just an American phenomenon, but globally we grew faster was the period between the late 40s to the early 70s, and that's a period of heavy regulation, of heavy control of the state on corporations and the power of corporations, and not just the state, but also organized labor. So those institutions were capable of holding in check the power of corporations. I think an essential concept to understand this sort of thing is one used by John Kenneth Galbraith long time ago, the idea of countervailing power. So that if you have a very powerful sort of institution in the economic arena, you need some sort of countervailing power to preclude sort of a very imbalanced outcome. And so the growth of the state and the and workers' interest in that period from the 40s to the 70s led to this sort of massive backlash by corporations. And with all of the protests and all of the sort of Tea Parties and Occupy this and that, we haven't been able to really, with Bernie, say, create a coalition that pushes back on the power of corporations, here or, I should say, in other parts of the world.
So let me ask you on the last question I've got on this before I get your opinion on something else. I'm looking at, this isn't the first time the EU has done this. They went after Starbucks and Fiat back, I guess, last October. They've done a lot of this in going after some of these companies to pay these tax bills. How much of it do you think that the EU is trying to get everybody on the same page and not allow the kind of beggar thy neighbor economic development that happens here in the U.S.?
Well, that's built in the rules of the EU. It's one of the good things about the EU. So certainly I think that's part of the story. How effective the EU has been, that's another story. There is a lot of internal backlash because while the EU does that very well, the EU also has been stuck with the euro and with austerity policies that do hurt workers. And so there is a sort of a nativist, nationalist sort of backlash around Europe too, Brexit being the sort of most recent and egregious sort of example of that. So, I mean, it's not that everything in the EU is fine, but certainly on this crackdown on tax havens, it's a good idea. There was an OECD sort of this group of developed countries that they wrote a report a few years back, and they were trying to crack down on tax havens. This has sort of gone slightly off the agenda, I think, and it has not been discussed. For example, in the U.S., there has not been much of a discussion of tax havens at all during this electoral campaign, even though very recently we have all of this stuff with the Panama Papers and
which went away really quickly.
Went away very fast, didn't it? And so that I'm sure if there was no scrutiny, in part as I think we had we discussed this in one of your programs, but in part because the U.S. has its own tax havens, Delaware and a few other states that are in a sense internal tax havens. But this has not been an issue in the campaign, and this is an important part of what we should be discussing. It's possible, God knows exactly for what reason Trump is not releasing his income tax. It's possible that he's not as wealthy as he claims he is. But one of the possibilities is that he pays very little in terms of income tax. Certainly, that I think was the reason why Romney showed. He showed I think only 1 or I
think it was 2
1
years.
or 2 years of income tax.
Right.
And I think the reason was if we went back,
It was like 14%
he was paying
interest.
less than what he actually showed. We wasn't that high, by the way.
Right.
So I think that's part of the problem. The wealthy in this country are not paying taxes, and so the whole notion, that we should tax the rich, has come back to the table to some extent, and these issues are sort of avoided.
And not just that. I mean, it's not just that they're not paying taxes. It's how much money and effort and time that they put into not paying taxes and avoiding and creating loopholes and all of that other stuff. Last question I had for you. There's some going on in Brazil. I wanted to get your thoughts on the impeachment of the president there.
So that's a done deal today. She was, overthrown, I would say is the correct word. It's a coup in the sense that the crime that she supposedly committed is that she transferred money from public banks and delayed the payment on some bills. And people suggest that that was overspending beyond the legal limit of the accepted primary surplus. And first of all, even if she did that, that's not a high crime that requires impeachment. From what the defense has sort of shown, she actually did not commit. In the dates that they suggest, the Congress had voted for a change in the primary surplus, so there was no actual, quote unquote, crime committed. This is a normal rule. We do it in the U.S. They done it in Brazil. Every single government before her. So that it's basically, a public bank gives her money and she delays, the payment back. And so some people say that was borrowing. She says no, and that's sort of the story. Essentially, what you have is there is no evidence, investigation that shows that she is connected to the significant corruption problems that Brazil has. And that's saying a lot. In a country with lots of corruption, she's not involved. She's one of the few politicians that is not involved. Almost everybody that is responsible for her impeachment, including the president that will step into her position, are accused of corruption. So what you have is a government that will come now to power that it's very corrupt, that will stop corruption investigations, and that will move into a neoliberal agenda of privatization, of more austerity, and that would lead to Brazil is already in a significant crisis. It's at this point worse than the Great Depression, so the GDP has fallen or will fall in between last year and this year at about 7%. So this is a significant collapse of GDP, and unemployment is increasing very fast. So things are going to get worse way before they get better. Again, here I should say, very discreetly, not explicitly, but U.S. government has been mildly favorable to this coup in Brazil, as much as it has been favorable to the neoliberal government in Argentina and to other sort of neoliberal governments in the region, as much as has been pressuring Venezuela. And all of this is because corporate within the U.S. would like to open up Latin America and to further our free trade agreement with the region. So that's something to hold the feet of Hillary and Democratic, the next Democratic administration, hopefully, close to the fire. So make sure that the U.S. does not push for further free trade agreements. This is not in the interest of workers in Latin America or of workers in the United States.
I'm with you. Mateus, I appreciate the thoughts. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you.
Great talking with you. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. Time to talk.
One of these days we're gonna wake up and find a new day. One of these days we wanna wake up and make a new way. One of these days. One of these days.
The Rick Smith Show, changing America for the better.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. 3,500 buses rolled into Washington, D.C. They were loaded with protesters, there to participate in Solidarity Day. The AFL-CIO organized the event to coincide with the Labor Day weekend. They issued a statement, "Why We March," outlining labor's demands. The purpose of the day was to bring attention to the concerns of the nation's working people, especially over health care. Other reasons for the march included a call for more public works programs. Another major demand was the end to permanent replacement of striking workers by scabs. Bernie Dinkin, Secretary-Treasurer of the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union in Philadelphia, explained, "One of the main purposes for us going down is to let our friends know, our friends in the Democratic Party who are sitting on their laurels, that if they do not support anti-scab legislation, we will vote against them, no matter what they've done in the past." The most important aim of the event was to show worker strength and solidarity. A similar showing of solidarity had taken place in the nation's capital 10 years before. After President Reagan fired striking air traffic controllers, a September 1981 rally had drawn more than 250,000 people. The 1991 action brought out similar numbers. Despite the 95-degree weather, tens of thousands converged on the nation's capital. They came from across the nation and 30 countries. 100 buses and a specially chartered train made the trip from Philadelphia. Noticeable among the crowd were members of the United Steelworkers Union with their gold and blue shirts. 180 different labor, religious, and civil rights groups stood up on that day for the rights of working people. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Tales of American Political History with Clinton Porter Hackney.
We've been talking about putting America back together after our polarizing Civil War by way of the 14th Amendment. President Andrew Johnson had helped Congress quickly abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment. The president went Confederate state by Confederate state, cutting deals that created state constitutions, outlawing slavery, and creating new legislatures that would ratify the proposed 13th Amendment. By doing so, the states would become part of the Union again, with rights to congressional membership. However, he had allowed former Confederate soldiers to vote and to hold public office, which in effect allowed them to establish their old white state governments that could put up roadblocks that would make things difficult for blacks, including the right to vote. Congress was not amused. Join us again for impeachment, militarization in the South, and the 14th Amendment. This is Clinton Porter Hackney at cphackney.com.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Look at this, and at the end of it, the hope is that this is the message to big corporations that we're gonna tax you. I mean, this is a big story that the EU is going after Apple, $14.6 billion. Now Ireland's saying no, we're gonna fight it because Apple paid everything that they were supposed to, and I'm going, that sounds like something we would do here. Now, at the end of it, it comes down to tax rates. And the reason, again, as we brought up in the last segment, the reason I want to see Trump's taxes is pretty simple. I want to see where he has spent his energy, his money, where all of the lawyers have pursued their tax avoidance tactics. Because as the professor from USC Gould School of Law said, Apple spends as much money on tax avoidance techniques as they do on their industrial design. Think about that for a minute. They spend as much money avoiding paying taxes as they do on their business, which is kind of shocking. Now you look at it, the top 1% here in our country, they have a tax rate of 39.6%. They spend enough money to make sure that the average of the folks there at the top, 24%. That's what they pay. So when all of this crying that we've got the highest rate in the whole free world, highest rate ever, it's not what they pay. And I go back to, this is why I want to see Trump's taxes. Because if you remember, you go back to Romney in 2012, he paid just around 14%. Took advantage of every possible loophole out there, had his army of tax avoidance attorneys, and paid just, like I said, 14% of that whopping, oh my gosh, my eyes are falling out, 39.6. And even that's not high. I think it was yesterday was the anniversary of FDR signing the Revenue Tax Act or the Wealth Tax Act, where, people like Romney, people like Trump, people in that top 1% could pay as high as 75%, at a certain rate. You go back to 1953, that top rate, 92%. And you go, you wonder why we had fully funded schools. You wonder how we could build the interstate highway system. You wonder how we could do all of these things, because we had the revenue to do it. Why we weren't running massive budget deficits, because we had the money coming in to do it. And at some point, the hope is that we wake up and go, we need to do that again. Because the country is crumbling. We need a massive investment in infrastructure, not just roads and bridges, but broadband and all of that other stuff as well. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about the state here of Pennsylvania. What is the state of working Pennsylvania? What are the jobs like? What's the outlook? I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Mark Price from the Keystone Research Center going to be here right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
You asked what the issue is. There's too many to list.
The Standing Rock Sioux tribe takes a stand against massive new oil pipeline.
Environmentalists, lawmakers, and oil and gas companies fought tooth and nail over this one. In the end, Governor Jerry Brown got his way.
California passes most sweeping climate change law yet. Evacuations in West Virginia after leak of deadly chlorine gas. Plus, Obama creates the world's largest protected marine sanctuary.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We didn't cover this story about the floods until it became political either.
I told you Fox News was going to go down the tubes as soon as Roger Ailes left. Admitting an error on air? What the fox? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, this fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's sort of becoming the new Keystone XL pipeline fight, it seems, up in North Dakota.
Oh, yes, it most certainly is. Up in North Dakota, thousands of Native Americans and others have gathered in peaceful protest to support the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in an attempt to stop construction of the $4 billion Dakota Access Pipeline because it threatens ancient sacred sites and will cross the Missouri River just upriver of their reservation, where any spill would contaminate their primary water supply. In an extended interview on the Bradcast, Standing Rock Sioux Chairman David Archambault called the pipeline an unacceptable threat.
We have to look after the kids that are not even here yet. So what we're really doing is we're talking for our ancestors who are no longer here and can't speak, and we're talking for those children who are not even born yet from our nation.
The tribe is also suing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for lack of meaningful consultation. The Corps had required the pipeline route to be moved away from the city of Bismarck's water supply, but approved it near the Standing Rock Sioux water supply because a spill there would impact fewer people.
Yeah, just a few Indians. What do they care?
The tribe has asked a federal judge to approve an injunction to stop construction on the pipeline. In West Virginia, a leak of toxic chlorine gas on Saturday forced the evacuation of 2 communities after a bright green cloud of the deadly gas leaked from a rail car at the Axiall chemical plant located nearby. 2 employees and 5 residents required medical treatment. No cause has been determined yet, but the Charleston Gazette reports that the Axiall chemical plant has a history of significant safety problems, including an incident in 2014 in which an employee was killed. In California, a major victory for climate action. After a very tough fight, the state legislature passed a major expansion to California's landmark climate law. The original 2006 law required the state to cut emissions down to 1990 levels. It's worked so well that California's already met that target. The law was set to expire in 2020, so instead, the state legislature's Democratic majority extended the law to 2030 and increased the goal with a new, more ambitious target of lowering emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Governor Jerry Brown called it a major victory.
There are a lot of Trump-inspired acolytes that even walk the halls of this state capitol. But they have been vanquished, and vanquished in a very solid way because of the people standing behind them. So bring it on. We'll have more battles, and we'll have more victories.
Of course, by victories, Jerry Brown means putting people out of work and crippling the economy like we have out here in California. Oh, wait, where we've got a surplus and we've got more jobs than ever, and never mind.
The California State Legislature also passed a joint resolution urging the federal government to pass a revenue-neutral carbon tax, requiring polluters to pay for the cost of their pollution, with 100% of the revenue returned to households. Probably won't see any of that anytime soon in Congress.
The U.S. Congress?
Yes.
No, we won't.
But for the record, The Guardian reports that studies of similar carbon tax mechanisms in other countries have shown that a price on carbon emissions has a modest beneficial impact on their economies.
That's a foreign newspaper. They don't read those in Congress.
Finally, some more good news. In Iowa, the State Utilities Board has approved a wind turbine project that it says will be the nation's largest wind energy project. And in Hawaii, on the heels of designating the nation's newest national monument in Maine, President Obama over the weekend also created the largest ocean sanctuary in the world off the northwestern coast of the Hawaiian Islands. He expanded the existing Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument to 4 times its size, protecting 500,000 square miles of land and sea and prohibiting all commercial extraction activities.
I'm just impressed you were able to say that name.
Me too.
For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on gold.
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
Working hard to make a left, rain shed a bomb red. Father, son, left to carry on, blue devil held his vein. Oh, he's a working class man.
So tomorrow, the big day here in Pennsylvania. The Keystone Research Center, they're going to be releasing their 2016 State of Working Pennsylvania. They do this, I think they've been doing this every year for as long as I can remember, ahead of the Labor Day holiday, to talk about, what's important for working families across the Commonwealth. And that's why I've asked our good friend Mark Price, he's a labor economist over there at the Keystone Research Center, to come give us kind of a preview, an inside look, or maybe just a peek around the opening page. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, it's always awesome to be here. Thank you.
So what is the state of working Pennsylvania? How long have you guys been doing this?
This is edition 21. So 21 years. I haven't been here for all of them, but I've been here, I believe, for 13 of them. It's an annual event for us, and it's sort of our purpose for being in a lot of ways. We do a lot of work in the state capitol, sort of tracking the budget and tracking various bills that go through the General Assembly, the things sometimes to do good things like raise the minimum wage, sometimes to do bad things like enact prevailing wage repeal. And this, though, is our chance not to sort of focus on the ins and outs of what's going on across the street, but to really look at the Pennsylvania economy with an eye towards how is it performing for most people, as opposed to the folks in boardrooms and shareholders, but how are actual working people doing?
So then the question then becomes, and I don't know how much you can tell me ahead of tomorrow's big release party, but how are we doing?
The big release party, that'll be a first. Maybe we'll do that for year 22. Well, I think, sort of the context for this year's report comes back to, and, we sort of have talked about this a couple times I've been here this already. This has been a very strange year, 2016, right? It's had a lot of tragedy, and it's had a lot of, I think, divisiveness, trouble around police violence and then violence against police, and now this general election campaign where we have, the Donald Trump platforming on a platform that really points the finger at, the woes in America are really about other people, right? Particularly foreigners, people abroad, and, immigrants here at home, but also, the Chinese and various other groups. And I think what we wanted to do is sort of take a look at the landscape in Pennsylvania, because in particular, I think this election does appear to be, at least judging from my television watching, I can't miss any number of commercials from both candidates.
We most certainly are being hit from both sides.
We are being hit, and I think that comes down to the realization that in this election, sort of the ground to cover and the ground to take is going to be places like Pennsylvania that have a broad group of workers that have sort of folks are thinking about as being in play. So one of the things we did in the report is we broke up wage trends for different groups of workers, focusing on men and women separately, and also looking at the experience of men with less than a college degree as opposed to men with a college degree, the same deal for women, looking at differences by race to sort of get a sense for these trends, and really ultimately trying to understand, is what's going on in the economy, is it a shared experience? Is it a common experience? And I think sort of the bottom line of the report, which won't be a surprise to you for all the work that you do talking about these issues, when you look at white and black men with less than a college degree, this has been a really sort of rough 40 years.
Right.
We have seen really dramatic declines in wages for that group of men.
And that would coincide with deindustrialization, the loss of manufacturing.
Deregulation of trucking, a whole range of policy levers that have sort of ticked off in the wrong direction for both groups of men. I think so. Our first sort of message here, as you can sort of see, is that there's not a lot of difference in the experience of white and black men. Certainly, there's still a wage gap between white and black men with less than a college degree, but the end reality is that wages are down for both groups all across Pennsylvania, and they're down dramatically. Looking at women in particular, white and black women with less than a college degree, a very similar finding. Women do slightly better than men in this category of educational attainment in the sense that their wages don't fall as much, but
their wages were never as high.
Their wages were never as high to begin with, and they still face a rather substantial gap. So again, it's sort of a common experience is an economy here that in Pennsylvania that has not performed well for a broad group of people. Now, we also look, of course, at college graduates, and roughly 7 in 10 workers in Pennsylvania have less than a college degree. So really, we're talking about really only 30% of the workforce. But even looking at college graduates, They had a pretty good run from around 1979 to 2000, rising wages for both men and women. Women did the best with a college degree, certainly made serious gains, both black and white women. But
again, because they started off further behind.
Yeah, much further behind. And, white and black men with a college degree also have done reasonably well. Again, their wages still aren't growing very rapidly, but relative to other groups, they did well up to 2000. But the stagnation that we observed in the other educational groups really also spread to college graduates. So college graduate wages for men, women are down from 2000 in Pennsylvania. So sort of there are, of course, differences, but at the end of the day, the common experience is one of struggle, of wage stagnation. And I think that sort of comes back to the point that we like to make, that, at the end of the day, this is an economy. It's about all of us. There's not a broad division that you can really find where, somebody's doing exceptionally well relative to the other groups. We are in an economy that is generally producing a lot of stuff, a lot of wealth, and a lot of income, but it's not showing up in people's paychecks. And as we've talked about before on various reports examining trends at the top, that is the one group, when you look at Pennsylvania income trends, that have successfully managed to do very well. The top 1% of earners, as we have talked on this show many times, at least from 1979 to 2013, have captured more than half of income growth. This is 59,000 families, that have basically captured most of income growth. And that's a pretty remarkable finding. It's not dramatically new, but I think in the context of a divisive election, we sort of think about it as a way to remind folks that, sure, the economy's not doing great, but it's not doing great for anybody. Except for those folks at the top. And so we put forward what we would call an agenda to raise pay in Pennsylvania. It's a long agenda, and it has sort of the things you would expect from us. We advocate for raising the minimum wage, extending paid sick leave and family leave. We also, talk about the need for industry wage standards, thinking about those industries that have been growing over time in Pennsylvania, like trucking. Is there a way that we can explore a trucking wage that gives a living wage for folks who drive, folks who are part of that group that have done very poorly over time, precisely because we have changed the way the trucking industry works, and in the process extracted a lot of profit, a lot of income, and not paid out in terms of a lot of wages.
Yeah, and it didn't come down into cheaper prices either, as we were promised back before they did deregulation. But everything you laid out there, it sounds to me you're prescribing basically what the labor movement did from the end of the 40s up until Reagan came into office, which is making sure that industries had higher standards, that we had decent wages, people had decent benefits. It sounds like you're now moving that into legislative kind of policies instead of having the on-the-ground organizing.
I think that's right. I mean, we're still calling ultimately for – you're not going to get all of this through legislation alone. I mean, certainly one of the most important ways to do it is expanded collective bargaining, right? And we do – that's one of the planks in this is what can we do to make it easier for workers to organize? And that's a big lever. But it also is one of the more frustrating levers that we have sort of seen in the past, 36 years of moving in the right direction so that people can organize more effectively. But I think it's part of our plank, as much as moving legislation to raise the minimum wage. So it's part of the story.
Is Pennsylvania any different than the other states in the country? I mean, are we seeing different trends, or is this kind of we're on par with everybody else?
We are more or less on par with everyone else. Wage growth hasn't been, at least very recently, as robust in Pennsylvania as it has been in other parts of the country. And that just reflects, we kind of had a little bit of a struggle for a period there, and the economy wasn't producing as many jobs. And I think that's shown up in a bit more sluggish wage growth than the country has experienced overall. But even overall, the country is not doing spectacular, especially when you consider that, we are now in 2016, right? And the recession was over long ago, and we're just now barely beginning to see some signs of wage and income growth that have been stronger than we've seen in 7 or 8 years. That's a too long to wait, right? Because, again, wages got to climb if we're going to make any real progress going forward. And the situation we're in now is that they haven't yet surpassed previous peaks as long ago as 2000. And that just means these trends are going to persist. So Pennsylvania is pretty much like the rest of the country, although recently maybe a bit slower in terms of wage growth.
Yeah, how much of that is the lack of investment that we see coming out of the General Assembly and the austerity of the Corbett years and coming into this? How much of that is that, or are there other reasons?
No, I think that's a big part of the story. Certainly, as we've talked before, Pennsylvania early in the recovery had a nice head start than other parts of the country. California, Florida, Arizona, Nevada were still suffering mightily from the housing bubble. We had elements of the bubble, but they weren't as severe. And so we emerged out of this recession somewhat stronger with much better job growth in a lot of parts of the country. And then we had a round of austerity from the Corbett administration that led to thousands of layoffs, and that in turn really did slow the economy down. And I think we're seeing that in this wage data, that we're just somewhat behind the rest of the country. Certainly with respect to the minimum wage, you might suspect that low wages at the very bottom probably are more sluggish in Pennsylvania than the rest of the country because, again, big chunks of the country have already now moved the minimum wage higher than $7.25.
If people wanted to take a look and read the state of working Pennsylvania over their holiday weekends and sitting by the poolside, when can we get it?
Well, if they'll send me their address, I'll come join them by the pool. I give you a personal PowerPoint and into our wonderful charts. Or you can go, if you don't want to hang out with a labor economist on your weekend, you can go to www.keystoneresearch.org and you can download all the goodness right around tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Anything for the holiday you're doing? Anything special for the big Labor Day holiday?
I am continuing to mix concrete and fix the foundation of my garage.
Good for you. Doing a little labor on Labor Day. Good for you. And as I always say, better you than me.
Thanks, Rick.
Mark, great talking with you. Mark Price, labor economist, Keystone Research Center. Again, if you want to take a look at the state of working Pennsylvania tomorrow, it will be available. You can get there from the ricksmithshow.com. Just click on Mark's name. It'll take you to the Keystone Research Center's webpage. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Blues. I work all day to take all my class. I got a working class blues. I work all day to take all my class. I get my skinny pay on Friday. Baby, I can't go for that.
Donnie Trump, what a maverick, what a shake-em-up outsider, what an anti-establishment fighter for working stiffs. Oh, and don't forget this, what a phony. The Donald sounds like a populist on the stump, bellowing that the system has been jerry-rigged by and for the corporate and political elites, which is killing the middle class. Well, he's right about that. But what'll he do about it? I'll fix it, he barks. I'll make the system honest again. Trust me. As Groucho Marx said, to know if a man is honest, ask him. If he says he is, he's a crook. Or, in the case of this phony populist, you could look at the specific fixes he's proposing in his blueprint for the, quote, economic renewal of America's working class. Trump's idea of working class turns out to be millionaires and billionaires, for that's who would get the bulk of benefits from his agenda. In his blustery speeches, he assails corporations that are offshoring and outsourcing American jobs, charging them with knocking down middle-income families and devastating working-class cities. But then he turns around and rewards them. His proposed tax cuts, for example, don't benefit low-wage workers at all and provide only a pittance of gain for those with middle-class paychecks. But corporations are given a huge windfall with a nearly 60% cut in their tax rate. This giveaway will also take $240 billion a year out of our public treasury. Money desperately needed for such basics as expanding educational opportunities and restoring our nation's dilapidated infrastructure. This is Jim Hightower saying, what we have here is the same old failed elitist hokum that Republicans have been peddling for decades, only his is delivered with more bombast. Rhetoric aside, Trump's plan is to replace Ronald Reagan's trickle-down theory with his own anti-worker scheme of tinkle-down economics.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Fort Lauderdale to Santa Clara. It sounds like a pretty straightforward JetBlue flight, right? Think again. The Fort Lauderdale is the one you know in South Florida. Santa Clara, that's Cuba. And Wednesday's flight happened to be the first ever direct, regularly scheduled commercial flight between the two countries. Charter flights have long been allowed for Americans, fitting into one of several special travel categories, but direct commercial flights are a brand new thing enabled by a recent warming of relations. Silver Airlines and American Airlines will begin direct flights to Cuba next month. The Islamic State's number 2 man is dead. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani was reportedly killed by coalition airstrikes in Syria, the terror group admitted this week. The American and Turkish air forces have been operating in the area of northern Syria, where he reportedly died of injuries. Adnani is believed to have led the Islamic State's propaganda efforts and played a substantial role in organizing attacks outside Iraq and Syria. Several weeks ago, it was reported in the British press that the two ministries tasked with formally removing Britain from EU treaties and crafting their replacements were understaffed and not experienced enough for the job. Those challenges meant the Brexit might not be finalized until 2019 or 2020. Well, Prime Minister Theresa May summoned her cabinet on Wednesday to make sure one thing was clear. Britain's split with the EU is still on. May is reportedly standing by an earlier pledge to not trigger the formal withdrawal process from the EU until early next year, the logic being that the extra months between now and then would allow British officials to devise the most lucrative terms possible for Britain's divorce. This Brexit Band-Aid is not coming off quickly. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
According to ADP National Employment Report, the job numbers for August, the private sector employment increased by 177,000 jobs from July to August. Small businesses made up about 63,000 of those. Mid-sized, medium businesses, about 44,000, and large businesses, 70,000 of them. Service providing companies added 183,000 employees, trade, transportation, utilities, along that line, 26,000. Financial services and activities, 15,000. Business and support services, professional services, 53,000. Franchise jobs, yes, those are your McJobs or Subway jobs, about 19,200. The bad news, well, goods producing jobs, they lost 6,000. Those would be your manufacturing jobs. Those would be those producing jobs. 6,000 of those gone. And that's in addition to the 5,000 lost the month before. So again, we've got some manufacturing problems in the country, and policy being a big part of it. Here's some bad news. I guess good news that Pennsylvania hasn't lost its mind, but not such great news that the poll, this recent Reuters poll, has Trump and Clinton dead even at 39% each. Almost 9% are other, 7.5% refused, and 4.9% would not vote. I don't quite know how you get there. But here's the thing, the sane part, the rational part, as the polling has here in Pennsylvania, you've got Hillary Clinton up by 8 over Donald Trump. The Reuters poll was national, dead even with Trump and Clinton national. Here in Pennsylvania, Clinton up by 8 over Trump. In the Senate race, Katie McGinty has a 4-point edge over Pat Toomey. And look, I go back to this. Toomey is a guy who basically wrote the book on free trade deals. Like Portman in Ohio, who was Bush's trade representative and pushed through a lot of this stuff. they've now taken anti-trade stances and kind of getting away with it. I actually had someone the other day say, well, Pat Toomey's, he's against those free trade agreements. No. How does it stick with Kerry that he was against it for it before he was against it? Why isn't this stuck to Toomey? This was a guy who literally wrote a book on free trade. And yet he's being given kind of a pass, which is why I'm glad to see the McGuinty campaign hitting him on that in the next hour. We're going to talk with Katie McGuinty about the campaign and her plan to revitalize manufacturing. Because I look at these manufacturing numbers, it's terrible. It's absolutely terrible that we're still losing jobs in the producing parts of our economy. The I'll wash your dog, you cut my grass economy seems to be doing okay. The do you want fries with that economy seems to be doing okay. Those aren't really family sustaining jobs. Those factory jobs that, as Mark was talking about here a second ago, white males with less than the college education, that was their career path. These were the people who built things with their hands. These are the folks who learned skills on how to do that. And the jobs aren't there. And it comes back to, one, our trade policy, but two, national priority. As we're continuing to give more and more big tax cuts and more economic development money to these companies who aren't creating jobs as they claim they're going to, and then end up leaving the country to go somewhere else, we're ended up stuck holding the bag. And at some point, maybe the hope is that we wake up. And look, I hope out of all of this anger, and there's a ton of it on both sides of the political aisle, the hope is that all this anger, we actually start demanding something get done. I mean, that's the part of it. Something's got to get done. Don't you think? On some level? Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Katie McGuinty, Pennsylvania's U.S. senatorial candidate, going to be here talking about the big race and her new, recently released manufacturing policy. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to thericksmithshow.com. If you've missed any portion of the program, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. At the Wisconsin AFL-CIO Conference in Madison, AFL-CIO Secretary-Treasurer Liz Shuler said that Labor's political effort in the elections is strong, and not just in the top battleground states.
I think the effort is going well. It's strong. We have certainly Tier 1 states that we're focusing more effort on, but we have a campaign and a plan that's really going to be implemented nationwide, making sure that we get the information out to union members and communities of working class voters so that people know where the candidates stand on the issues that are important to working families. We are going to remain steadfast and dogged and make sure that we get the information in the hands of every working person and get them to the polls.
Shuler says that Trump's rhetoric can play well at first glance to some workers, but Labor can blunt that appeal by making sure that workers know about Trump's anti-worker actions and positions.
Trump has some great ads on TV, and certainly the issues around trade resonate with working class voters, but what he says and what he does are two different things. He has been quoted saying wages are too high. He's been quoted as saying that he loves right to work. He makes his own products in countries overseas that are paying pennies on the dollar. So I think what he does and what he says really aren't consistent, and we need to make sure people know that and aren't romanced by the rhetoric.
The University of California San Francisco Medical Center has agreed to rehire 24 former minimum wage contract custodians and give them raises after a public outcry. And instead of contract workers, they will be UCSF employees. Mostly Chinese immigrants, the workers were fired after speaking up for better working conditions. UCSF had demanded that the contractor cut the workers' wages. The workers resisted, and after a 2-year public struggle, UCSF is rehiring them at $17.52 an hour with health care and retirement benefits. California's Public Employment Relations Board had issued a complaint against UCSF for illegal retaliation. against the workers. Culinary Workers Union Local 226 has a new website warning the traveling public about the labor dispute at Trump Hotel Las Vegas. www.vegastravelalert.org/Trump will educate and inform about the refusal of Donald Trump and fellow billionaire co-owner Philip Ruffin to negotiate a fair union contract for Trump Hotel Las Vegas workers. The culinary workers say that 57,000 other casino workers in Vegas have fair wages, job security, and good health benefits with union contracts, in stark contrast to Trump employees.
Brought to you in part by the Alliance for American Manufacturing, working to build coalitions between business, labor, legislators, and activists. Information about our mission to strengthen American manufacturing and rebuild the middle class through smart public policy is available online at americanmanufacturing.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So in looking at the ADP National Employment Report and the fact that we lost 6,000 goods-producing jobs last month, in addition to the 5,000 the month before, how do we revitalize that manufacturing base? How do we turn America back into that producing nation? Well, today, Katie McGinty was out in the western part of the state laying out her vision, her plan, her idea on how we do just that. And I've got the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate here in Pennsylvania to come talk with us. Katie, thanks for taking time for us.
Rick, I hope you're hearing me a little better than I'm hearing you, but thanks so much for having me on.
I appreciate you taking a little time for us. I know you got a busy schedule. So what's the plan? How do we turn these job losses around? How do we revitalize our manufacturing?
Well, Rick, in many ways, it's not really rocket science, right? I mean, one of the ways we do that is to stand up from people who've been playing us a bit for patsies. I look at the Chinese, and for goodness sakes, I mean, no wonder China has captured markets and good jobs from us. They don't play by the rules. They don't, have to follow what we have been religious in following, and that is we don't manipulate our currency. We don't dump our products in their markets. And we need to insist on the same. And one of the things you certainly don't do is double down on a strategy that hasn't worked. And so I've been very much opposed to this this Trans-Pacific Partnership, this latest trade deal, because even the experts tell us that it will cost us $50,000. To me, he's pushed forward aggressively. He's trying to flip-flop, but track record on this particular trade agreement and many others that he's pushed. But here are the
Yeah, not going to happen. Evidently, you still there? You must be on the turnpike. Yeah, that ain't going to happen. Not going to happen. Anyway, the plan, as I understand it, and look, we've talked how we revitalize our manufacturing, and I appreciate Katie for taking time. When you're traveling from one campaign event to the next, it is a difficult deal. But here's the thing, as I look at this, the reality being, we need to do smart things. And part of it is making sure, as she said, if you heard or not, stopping the currency manipulation, stopping the dumping, stopping the mercantilist kind of policies that we see in China. And look, this is where the Trumpites, this is where the Tea Party folks, this is where I think we can all begin to come together. It's interesting that even the guy who, as I pointed out earlier, even Pat Toomey, the guy who wrote the book on free trade, even the guy in Ohio, Rob Portman, who wrote the book on free trade, they're now coming around saying, well, we're against these trade deals. And you go, wait a minute, at some point, don't we hold the people who put us in this mess accountable? And for me, the whole thing with Toomey is, look, all of the policies that you've advocated for, the free trade, the tax cuts, all of this stuff, this is what's gotten us into this mess. Earlier in the program, we talked with Mateus Vernango, professor of economics from Bucknell, and he pointed out something that John Kenneth Galbraith said years ago, which is you got to have a countervailing force. There's got to be balance. There's got to be someone that holds the line and holds people accountable. China's running wild because corporate America is going, hey, we want this. And I remember the tire case from a couple of years ago where the steel workers had spent tons of money pursuing a trade case that they ultimately won, that the American tire companies were being harmed by the Chinese tactics. But the American companies, they didn't want the steel workers to pursue it. They were happy. They were happy moving to China and doing their production there at much, much cheaper costs, and they were happy shipping it back here and selling it at premium costs because they were making a lot more money. They had cut their labor costs just by using exploitable labor in China, and we said, okay. I mean, think of how insane that is. And you go across the spectrum, whether it's tires or auto parts or ocular steel or cold rolled steel, or the list just goes on and on. Whether it's any of that stuff, it's just, it's one of those things that just blows my mind that we still allow to happen. I think we got Katie McGinty back on the line. Katie, do I have you?
It's Josh. Sorry about that, Rick.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. That's we'll pick it up another time.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, man. But I'll be in touch with you, and we'll get this sorted out for another day.
All right. Thanks so much, Josh. Appreciate it. Again, this is one of those things where it happens, and we've got to make it not happen. We've got to stop this stuff before it harms us. And this is where, going back to Hillary Clinton's idea of a trade prosecutor, this is where I find a good idea. Maybe a trade prosecutor who's going to look at it from what benefits not just the American companies, but actually the country as a whole. Because, again, I go back to the American companies are fine. These big multinationals, they're thrilled with going overseas. Because, again, as and I forget which company guy it was, but he said, look, anything I want in China, the answer is always yes. Anything we want. We want to pollute? Yes. We want to exploit workers? Yes. We want to do any of this? Yes. That's the answer. This is the kind of world that the business community wants here in the U.S. And the question that you have to ask yourself is, looking at our history, looking at our past, looking at the record of going, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want. What's it done for workers? What's it done for communities? What's it done for our country? Seriously. I mean, stop and think about all of the horrible tragedies, all of the horror stories that we've heard. And, those are not just in the past. Those are the possibilities of the future. What's that saying? If you don't learn from the past, you're doomed to repeat it. Well, yes. So all of this talk about deregulation. Now, look, I'm not a fan of over-regulating, but there are reasons that regulations got passed in the first place. Not just because people wanted to be mean, not just because they wanted to be nasty, no, but because they said, look, this harmed someone. This destroyed something. We've got to make sure that doesn't happen again. I mean, you think of all the Superfund sites around this country, which honestly we don't hear about anymore. And our media falling down on the job because there's so many other things going on. I mean, it's just a bombardment of nonsense that the real stuff just seems to kind of go by the wayside. So when I hear the Trump people going on about, we're going to do this and that, understand the business community, they're happy with the way things are. They want these trade deals. They want to be able to leave this country, go somewhere else, produce their goods, and dump them back here. And dump them at a high cost, because that is profit. The essence of business is not to make a product. Forget that. The essence is how much money can you put in your pocket. That's the essence of it. And these folks are saying, look, if I can line my pocket with tons of money by skirting environmental and labor laws, so much better for us. I mean, stop and think about why would we engage in a free trade agreement with a country like Vietnam? How many of the products that we make end up in Vietnam? I mean, honestly and truthfully, how many big gas-guzzling automobiles do you see? How much industrial machinery? How much medical machinery do we see? We don't make consumer goods anymore, so you're not really opening it up to that. What you're doing, though, is you're opening up that market for American companies to move production to and then bring it back here. And, I alluded to this the other day when I was talking with Andy, and I said, look, the reality is these trade agreements that we're seeing are nothing more than the Cold War era trade policies that we had for generations. We gave away a bunch of industries. We gave away a bunch of jobs. But the difference between now and then is then we had the most dominant manufacturing in the world. And you think about it, over all these years, we've given it away. Consistently going, here, take it. Yep, here you go. Next, there you go. So the question is, when do we wake up? I find it interesting that everybody you talk to now is against free trade deals. I've been screaming about it now for going on 11 years. These free trade agreements are bad. And even the folks who pushed them the hardest have now come around and said, oh, we're against them. Like Pat Toomey and Rob Portman and a lot of the others, and the Trumps and the rest. Because finally the angry voting populace has said we've had enough. We've been screwed enough by this. So November will be interesting, to say the least. The hope is that the Democrats at least take back the Senate, if not take the White House as well, so that maybe we stop some of this stuff and maybe, just maybe, we hold some of them accountable. Sorry that we met. I hate cell phones. I got to be honest. It's one of those things. And I understand why the guy, I think it was Art Bell, his name was, he did the overnights. He left radio entirely because of cell phones, because the reception's terrible in most places. And who wants to hear a bubble conversation like that? It's crazy. And it's just nuts. Anyway, we'll get Katie McGinty back on the program here in the coming days to talk about the manufacturing plan and all that. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people from the top.
Don't believe that God wants me to give my money to someone like you. But I do believe in what a crazy man can do.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1921. That was the day the Battle of Blair Mountain raged in Logan County, West Virginia. Members of the United Mine Workers of America were attempting to organize the minefields in the southern part of the state. The efforts to bring workers to union was met with violent resistance. The miners armed themselves and marched south. As many as 10,000 miners joined the march. They met armed company men at Blair Mountain. In the battle that ensued, 1 million rounds were fired. The mine owners even hired private planes to drop bombs on Union miners. The U.S. Army intervened and the battle ended. Despite not being successful in their march, the bloody battle brought national attention to the violence in the coal fields. But that was not the last battle for Blair Mountain. In 2011, there was a proposal to bring mountaintop removal mining to Blair Mountain. This type of mining blasts off large chunks of a mountain surface to get at the coal seams below. Protesters stood against the proposal. They argued it would be environmentally devastating to the area. They also argued that it would blast away one of the most important sites of labor history in the nation. Some coal miners took exception to the protests. In a CNN documentary on the conflict, one union miner said, quote, "Mountaintop removal is what built this house, sends that little girl to school, provides insurance for my wife." But another miner joined in the protest against removal. He told CNN that miners had been, quote, "brainwashed to think, oh, I can't have a job unless it's a mountaintop removal job." In 2014, the state prohibited surface mining at Blair Mountain. For now, but that is subject to change. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Jordan Wilhelmy. Fox News host Martha McCallum defended Donald Trump's surrogate, Pastor Mark Burns, against criticism for his offensive tweet of a cartoon Hillary Clinton in blackface.
There are definitely channels and places in this country where you, sir, are not allowed to speak your mind as a member of the black community who is supporting Donald Trump. They have written you off, and they've decided that anything you have to say is not worthwhile, despite your years of experience and your own personal experience.
However, on MSNBC, The Washington Post, Eugene Robinson questioned the pastor's message.
When you talk about African Americans in the pastor's lexicon living under Democratic rule, well, in fact, a big chunk of the Democratic Party is African Americans who are elected officials at every level, including President of the United States.
This isn't the first time Burns has used inflammatory rhetoric as a surrogate for Trump. He has also pushed a conspiracy theory claiming Planned Parenthood has racist motivations and argued that Trump won't allow businesses to continue to, quote, rape America. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happy!
Officially in love with Michelle Bachmann, even if she's batshit crazy. Rick Smith.
It's all brand new. I'm crazy for you, and you know it's true. Yeah, I'm crazy for you. It's all brand new.
Yes, the crazy one. I miss her. I'm glad she's still hanging on. I'm glad she's still glomming on somewhere. The former Minnesota Representative Michelle Bachmann, or as now she is known as Donald Trump's evangelical advisor and foreign policy ear. Yeah, that's what I want. She's back in the news, and not really a surprise here, but I thought it was something of interest. Michelle believes that Donald was raised up by God to win the general election, and she goes on to quote the book of Daniel and a whole bunch of biblical, taking bits and pieces and like they do, little quotations that have said, God told me that Donald's the guy, so Donald is now the guy. Now, she said I was actually in support of Ted Cruz. She said I thought he was fabulous. But I also see that at the end of the day that God raised up, I believe, Donald Trump, who was going to be the nominee of this election. She says, I don't think God sits things out. He's a sovereign God. Trump became our nominee. Yeah. And she blathers on a bit more. But the sad reality is I fear that there are people like her who buy this kind of garble. And it's sad. I'm almost to the point where it's a mental illness, and I know that's a horrible thing to say, and I hope she gets treatment. It's that simple in my view. Anyway, some good news, some bad news, I guess. The bad news first. It looks like Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Marco Rubio won their primaries down in Florida, and Alan Grayson lost. There's the bad news. Good news, the people of Florida overwhelmingly support the idea of solar in their state. They evidently in Florida, if you have solar panels on your house, they tax you like a property tax on solar panels. So if you wanted to put them on your roof, they charge you an additional tax. If Walmart or any of these big companies wanted to do what I understand they're doing in a lot of places around the country, if they wanted to do that, no. You got to pay a huge tax, which makes it, again, one of those things that's not sustainable. And for me, you go, Florida is one of the places that, when climate change continues and it gets really, really bad, Florida is going to be the place that suffers the most because they're going to be the one that's, those beaches are further underwater. It turns out almost 2 million Floridians voted in favor, and they're saying more than the voters in the two U.S. Senate primaries combined. And you go, people overwhelmingly, 72% of the overall population voted for Amendment 4. It needed 6% to pass. It now goes, I guess, to the legislature to be codified into law, which for me, you go, this is a huge deal because, as the Solar Energy Industries Association points out, Florida has the third highest potential for solar in the country, but is only 14th in the amount of solar that's been installed. And they point out that, even while you've had 90% of that in the last year, they point out that Massachusetts, Colorado, North Carolina have all installed more solar than Florida. And you go, duh. Isn't that the sunshine? Isn't that the sunshine state? Isn't that where the sun is supposed to be? Wouldn't that be the smart, rational place to be putting more solar panels and have them everywhere? And the answer is, duh, yes. But again, it comes back down to policy. It comes back down to we just don't, for some reason, we just don't think that way. And for me, it's a no-brainer. In fact, my wife and I were just talking the other day. We generate 50% of our electricity overall for the year through our panels. Some months during the summer, we don't have an electric bill at all. And, it produces 100%. But overall, for the whole year, it's about 45, 50%. And we're considering doing the other half. And, we're talking about the long-term payoffs and how long we're going to stay in the house because it is an investment, because Pennsylvania is so screwed in the head when it comes to encouraging this as a matter of policy. They allowed the solar renewable energy credits just to fall through the floor. They allowed other states to buy in, so the price is just down in the basement. Instead of increasing the amount of solar in our energy portfolio, they've let it languish at, I think it's 0.5%, which is, minuscule. We've far surpassed. At that minuscule number, we're in far surplus, which is why the credits are $15 a piece. Whereas in places like New Jersey, where they've closed their state borders and they've increased the percentage, it's like $600. Which makes residential solar a much better payoff. Because look, that means you're not sucking as much energy from the grid. It means it doesn't have to be increased as much, and it isn't overtaxed and all of that. It's sane. It's rational. It makes sense. Which again, I guess part of why we're not gonna do it. Just not. But I look at this and I say, it's about time, and it's good news for the folks of Florida. Now, if you just get rid of some of that net metering stuff and the fees that they charge for being hooked up to the grid, I might not be as unhappy. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. This is a good idea, good solar story. I think so. Let's take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
What the issue is. There's too many to list.
The Standing Rock Sioux tribe takes a stand against massive new oil pipeline.
Environmentalists, lawmakers, and oil and gas companies fought tooth and nail over this one. In the end, Governor Jerry Brown got his way.
California passes most sweeping climate change law yet. Evacuations in West Virginia after leak of deadly chlorine gas. Plus, Obama creates the world's largest protected marine sanctuary.
All of those stories and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We didn't cover this story about the floods until it became political either.
I told you Fox News was going to go down the tubes as soon as Roger Ailes left. Admitting an error on air? What the fox? This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, this fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, it's sort of becoming the new Keystone XL pipeline fight, it seems, up in North Dakota.
Oh, yes, it most certainly is. Up in North Dakota, thousands of Native Americans and others have gathered in peaceful protest to support the Standing Rock Sioux tribe in an attempt to stop construction of the $4 billion Dakota Access Pipeline because it threatens ancient sacred sites and will cross the Missouri River just upriver of their reservation, where any spill would contaminate their primary water supply. In an extended interview on the broadcast, Standing Rock Sioux Chairman David Archambault called the pipeline an unacceptable threat.
We have to look after the kids that are not even here yet. So what we're really doing is we're talking for our ancestors who are no longer here and can't speak, and we're talking for those children who are not even born yet from our nation.
The tribe is also suing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for lack of meaningful consultation. The Corps had required the pipeline route to be moved away from the city of Bismarck's water supply, but approved it near the Standing Rock Sioux water supply because a spill there would impact fewer people.
Yeah, just a few Indians. What do they care?
The tribe has asked a federal judge to approve an injunction to stop construction on the pipeline. In West Virginia, a leak of toxic chlorine gas on Saturday forced the evacuation of 2 communities after a bright green cloud of the deadly gas leaked from a rail car at the Axiall chemical plant located nearby. 2 employees and 5 residents required medical treatment. No cause has been determined yet, but the Charleston Gazette reports that the Axiall chemical plant has a history of significant safety problems, including an incident in 2014 in which an employee was killed. In California, a major victory for climate action. After a very tough fight, the state legislature passed a major expansion to California's landmark climate law. The original 2006 law required the state to cut emissions down to 1990 levels. It's worked so well that California's already met that target. The law was set to expire in 2020, so instead, the state legislature's Democratic majority extended the law to 2030 and increased the goal with a new, more ambitious target of lowering emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. Governor Jerry Brown called it a major victory.
There are a lot of Trump-inspired acolytes that even walk the halls of this state capitol. But they have been vanquished, and vanquished in a very solid way because of the people standing behind them. So bring it on. We'll have more battles, and we'll have more victories.
Of course, by victories, Jerry Brown means putting people out of work and crippling the economy like we have out here in California. Oh, wait, where we've got a surplus and we've got more jobs than ever, and never mind.
The California State Legislature also passed a joint resolution urging the federal government to pass a revenue-neutral carbon tax, requiring polluters to pay for the cost of their pollution, with 100% of the revenue returned to households. Probably won't see any of that anytime soon in Congress.
The U.S. Congress?
Yes.
No, we won't.
But for the record, The Guardian reports that studies of similar carbon tax mechanisms in other countries have shown that a price on carbon emissions has a modest beneficial impact on their economies.
That's a foreign newspaper. They don't read those in Congress.
Finally, some more good news. In Iowa, the State Utilities Board has approved a wind turbine project that it says will be the nation's largest wind energy project. And in Hawaii, on the heels of designating the nation's newest national monument in Maine, President Obama over the weekend also created the largest ocean sanctuary in the world off the northwestern coast of the Hawaiian Islands. He expanded the existing Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument to 4 times its size, protecting 500,000 square miles of land and sea and prohibiting all commercial extraction activities.
I'm just impressed you were able to say that name.
Me too.
For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, or iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me, my lover stands on gold. Now the lessons of the past were all learned with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands in trenches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on! The union forever defending our rights. Let's fight the right wing while workers unite.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So we talked about yesterday the new study out by the Economic Policy Institute reporting that average weekly earnings for non-union private sector male workers would have been 5% higher, or $52 a week higher in 2013 had we had the same share of unionized members across the country. So the idea that union workers lift the wages of non-union workers, the higher the union density, the better off we all are. And that's why I think this election, this presidential election, like none other that I can remember, is really a stark difference in the candidates. You've got Donald Trump on one side, who says he's in favor of right-to-work nation, take that bad policy all across the country. And you've got Hillary Clinton on the other side, who's saying we need to figure out how to expand and get more people into the labor movement. That's why I've asked Liz Shuler, she's the Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO, to come talk with us. They have endorsed, I believe, Hillary Clinton. Liz, thanks for taking time for us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me on the show.
So, I look at this number, the fact EPI saying, look, you guys raise the wages for everybody, members and non-members alike.
Well, that's right, and thanks for lifting up that study. I think it's just, the message that we've been beating the drum on for years, so it's good to have some economists backing us up. But as you know, wages have been in decline as the unions have been in decline for decades. Looking back to the 1970s, as the report suggests, that the two track together, and we keep saying, the middle class share of income almost tracks union density if you put the two charts together, right? And so it is important that we get more people in unions, that more people are bargaining to get more of the wealth that they create. And so we think that absolutely growing the labor movement is going to help change this economy. Well,
now in this study, they say that the men's wages would have been higher, but the reality is that unions raise women's wages as well and close that massive inequality gap.
Absolutely. We keep saying that when you talk about pay equity, the best way to achieve pay equity is to join a union, right? Because we have the ultimate in transparency, and people know exactly what they're making, and that it's based on skill level and qualification, not your gender, when you have a union contract.
And the transparency part being a huge part of it, because, as we've talked about, there have been employers who, when employees ask their coworker how much you make, they fire them.
Absolutely. It's almost as if you're risking your job to have that conversation, which, as we know, data shows that it's more difficult for whatever reason, a lot of different factors, for women to go in and negotiate higher pay when they're in a non-union environment. And so it leaves it to chance and then certainly to risk, right? When you're having that conversation with your boss, it's like, Donald Trump. He says, "You're fired," right? So I think the union environment, the notion of having a collective bargaining agreement is especially important for women when it comes to pay equity.
So the question then becomes, how's Hillary Clinton going to make that better? Why is she better than the "you're fired" guy?
Well, Hillary Clinton has been fighting for working families her entire career. We see it time and time again, whether it's, her career in the early days on up to as a U.S. Senator and Secretary of State, and now as candidate Clinton. She definitely is not afraid to say the U word, union, right? She believes strongly in collective bargaining as a way to create a strong economy, to get more people to work earning fair wages. And she has a plan. She has a plan to create jobs, and she has been very upfront about her desire to invest in infrastructure and create more jobs that way. So we think she definitely has not only the plan on paper, but the track record to demonstrate that she is out there fighting for working people.
Let me ask you the sideline question to this, because I get listeners saying they don't trust her. I get emails saying that there's a trust issue. The mainstream media is just beating that drum. Why do you think it is that there seems to be this trust gap with Hillary? Because I look at the plans and I'm thrilled. I look at her stance against the TPP, very happy. Why do you think that this trust issue is there?
Well, I think it's probably, again, what she's said over the course of time. The enemies that we have out there who want to destroy the progressive movement and the people who want to create fairness in the economy that are running for office, the best way to tear down their ideas and create that level of distrust is to put out, misinformation and misnomers about their record. And I think they've been doing that for a very long time. I mean, she's been in the public eye for decades now, and I hate to use the term vast right-wing conspiracy, but essentially, there have been forces at work for many, many years, planting those seeds in a very calculated way, anticipating that she would be running for president someday. And so I think that has, unfortunately, some people tend to believe what they hear regardless of whether it's based in fact.
Yeah, I spent some time at we went and covered the RNC convention, and one of the main frames there was Hillary for president. And I kept asking people, what crime did she commit? Because she's got to be the smartest criminal in history because she's been dissected for 30 years. If you can't find something with the amount of money and the amount of time you've spent, it's time to move on.
Exactly. And it is amazing to me that you could be on national television at a convention from the stage saying the things they've said. But I guess that's why we love our democracy, right? The freedom of speech. But I think it is important that we do get the facts out there, and I think that's going to be the role for labor, is to get the information into the hands of people who work for a living to show the contrast between these two candidates. And you alluded to that it's a very clear difference between Donald Trump, who says, wages are too high, and that he actually loves right to work. He was quoted as saying that. He talks a good game on trade, but he actually in practice is outsourcing his own, products to be made overseas. And Hillary, as I said, has been fighting on behalf of working people her entire career, and she believes that, pay equity should be a priority for women, and that we should have family-friendly policies in place that can help people support their families. And so I think there's, we can tick down the list of issues, but she's been there.
Yeah, I mean, we hear an awful lot from the right side of the aisle talking about family values, but I don't see much in the way of policy to back that up.
Absolutely. And what I think is interesting, having a woman running for the President of the United States has really elevated the work-family fit. I don't say work-family balance because I think that's somewhat misleading. But the idea that when you work for a living and you're raising a family, there are policies that we need to have in place that are part of the core economic equation. They're not cute little side issues that, oh, wouldn't it be nice if women had, paid maternity leave or maternity leave generally. It's Hillary has made those issues of work-family fit core to her economic policy. So paid family leave is one, earned sick days, of course. Fair scheduling is an issue to make sure that people know how many hours they're going to be working in a week, what a concept, and be paid fairly. And equal pay for women, quality, affordable child care. We all know that families are grappling with this issue. It's not just a woman's issue, it's a family's issue. Right. So it's part of the wage equation, it's part of the economic equation, and it's fundamental.
As someone who's a big supporter of labor unions and the work that you guys do, everything that you tick down there, to me, that's something that I go back to my grandparents' generation, that labor fought for. The idea that you had paid sick time, you had overtime, you had enforceable things in your contract. How much are we seeing of moving that into public policy as opposed to collective bargaining?
Well, it's interesting because this is resonating. These issues, these family issues, work-family fit issues are so important to working Americans, not just women. They have made their way into the public debate, and policymakers are feeling the pressure now, and we're seeing the ballot initiatives in various states across the country addressing it because the lawmakers have been sitting on their hands and, afraid to really make gains in the policy arena on these issues. You're right. The collective bargaining has been a place where we've been able to negotiate some of these policies, and most people in unions do have paid sick leave. But people outside unions, we know it's, I think, 40% of private sector workers don't have paid sick days. So these are issues. They're fundamental issues to, again, the economic well-being of people who work for a living. So I think we're feeling the pressure. We're starting to see. I know President Obama has been elevating these. We've had several White House summits that have talked about it. The Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, has been out there. And now Hillary Clinton has made this, as I said, a key top-tier priority in her campaign.
Let me ask you on the other side of this, because, I go back to 2008, President Obama, as candidate Obama, talked an awful lot about his support for unions, and an awful lot about the support for the Employee Free Choice Act and reforming labor law. Have you had any conversations with the Secretary about the possibility of making that something that they push for? I know, look, you got to have Congress along with you, but to me, there's a lot of push that goes with that as well.
Well, and absolutely, we got to get her elected first, so we want to do that, and then we will turn to the notion of governance and what is on the administration's list of top tier priorities, and she's made her commitment clear that unions and collective bargaining are a part of her top tier, and whether that's the Employee Free Choice Act Part 2 or labor law reform more broadly. As you know, we've had the Wage Act introduced in Congress, and it's something the AFL-CIO has been pushing for the last couple of years. But we need to keep the conversation alive. We need to keep pushing not only the President of the United States, but the Congress and elected officials in Washington to keep their eye on this issue, because as we know, labor law is broken. It takes an act of heroism to form a union, these days, because there's so much risk, and labor law has not kept up with the pace of, what workers need and want in the workplace as far as forming a union. So we are definitely committed to making this a top-tier issue in the next administration.
So last bit of questioning I've got for you. We're hearing a lot of reports that union members are, and I can't believe it, but I'm wondering if you have any polling to show that the mainstream frame that I'm getting, that there are a lot of union members who are Trump supporters. I haven't found an awful lot. I'm curious if you've got any internal polling on that.
Yeah, and I think this ends up being kind of a sexy storyline that might not have as much behind it as you would think, because pretty much every election we see, especially in a presidential year, we tend to have about 30% of our members that vote Republican. And we have been doing internal polling and, keeping pace with where our members' preferences are at the moment. We have a lot of work to do to continue to educate people. But it's trending essentially about the same as it usually does in presidential elections. So I think it's not as, foreboding as you might think in terms of the amount of support of union members for Donald Trump. But I will say he's done a good job of articulating a lot of the issues that the labor movement cares about. The problem is he talks out of both sides of his mouth, right? Like he makes claims that sound good in rhetoric, and then in terms of the follow-through, it's just not there. And so we know that his positions and his behavior is actually antithetical to what he's saying with his rhetoric.
Right. As I say, even a blind squirrel finds a nut, and he found it in the TPP because, look, I mean, that's a no-brainer for me. And I'm surprised by seeing people like Ted Strickland having such a hard time with Portman, because Portman is now flipped on trade. Toomey here in Pennsylvania is flipped on trade. There's so many opportunities to push back on this. And the hope is that come November, we oust Toomey and Portman and put Hillary into the White House. Liz, I appreciate you taking a little time for us, sharing some of your thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, and keep up the fight.
I appreciate it. Great talking with you. Liz Shuler, Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Firefighters, my friend, and the kids locked in the Capitol are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
Donnie Trump, what a maverick, what a shake-em-up outsider, what an anti-establishment fighter for working stiffs. Oh, and don't forget this, what a phony. The Donald sounds like a populist on the stump, bellowing that the system has been jerry-rigged by and for the corporate and political elites, which is killing the middle class. Well, he's right about that. But what'll he do about it? I'll fix it, he barks. I'll make the system honest again. Trust me. As Groucho Marx said, to know if a man is honest, ask him. If he says he is, he's a crook. Or, in the case of this phony populist, you could look at the specific fixes he's proposing in his blueprint for the, quote, economic renewal of America's working class. Trump's idea of working class turns out to be millionaires and billionaires, for that's who would get the bulk of benefits from his agenda. In his blustery speeches, he assails corporations that are offshoring and outsourcing American jobs, charging them with knocking down middle-income families and devastating working-class cities. But then he turns around and rewards them. His proposed tax cuts, for example, don't benefit low-wage workers at all and provide only a pittance of gain for those with middle-class paychecks. But corporations are given a huge windfall, with a nearly 60% cut in their tax rate. This giveaway will also take $240 billion a year out of our public treasury, money desperately needed for such basics as expanding educational opportunities and restoring our nation's dilapidated infrastructure. This is Jim Hightower saying, what we have here is the same old failed elitist hokum that Republicans have been peddling for decades, only his is delivered with more bombast. Rhetoric aside, Trump's plan is to replace Ronald Reagan's trickle-down theory with his own anti-worker scheme of tinkle-down economics.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, this is your World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, for Talk Media News. Fort Lauderdale to Santa Clara. It sounds like a pretty straightforward JetBlue flight, right? Think again. The Fort Lauderdale is the one you know in South Florida. Santa Clara, that's Cuba. And Wednesday's flight happened to be the first ever direct, regularly scheduled commercial flight between the two countries. Charter flights have long been allowed for Americans fitting into one of several special travel categories, but direct commercial flights are a brand new thing enabled by a recent warming of relations. Silver Airlines and American Airlines will begin direct flights to Cuba next month. The Islamic State's number 2 man is dead. Abu Muhammad al-Adnani was reportedly killed by coalition airstrikes in Syria, the terror group admitted this week. The American and Turkish air forces have been operating in the area of northern Syria, where he reportedly died of injuries. Adnani is believed to have led the Islamic State's propaganda efforts and played a substantial role in organizing attacks outside Iraq and Syria. Several weeks ago, it was reported in the British press that the two ministries tasked with formally removing Britain from EU treaties and crafting their replacements were understaffed and not experienced enough for the job. Those challenges meant the Brexit might not be finalized until 2019 or 2020. Well, Prime Minister Theresa May summoned her cabinet on Wednesday to make sure one thing was clear. Britain's split with the EU is still on. May is reportedly standing by an earlier pledge to not trigger the formal withdrawal process from the EU until early next year, the logic being that the extra months between now and then would allow British officials to devise the most lucrative terms possible for Britain's divorce. This Brexit band-aid is not coming off quickly. For more global news headlines, visit TalkMediaNews.com.
Don't have a phone? Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's a thundercloud exploding, and I'm free at last, like Joe Hill and Cesar Chavez, who fought in their own time, like our brothers and our sisters, up and down that picket line, like the unnamed and unnumbered, who struggle brave and long, like the Union men and women, standing up and standing strong, like the unnamed and unnumbered, who struggle brave and long, like the Union men and women, standing up and standing strong. Yep.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Interesting story coming out of the Great White North up there in Maine as their governor. And again, this is one of those kind of, you go, wow, could it be? Would he leave? Is it possible? The Tea Party governor, Paul LePage, do you remember the mock-up in this? Evidently, someone got him all lathered up and claimed that one of the lawmakers up there in Maine called him a racist. And it's not true. I can't find it anywhere. He can't find it. It's because it probably doesn't exist. It was probably somebody just screwing with him, which I think would be fun. But evidently he left a voicemail that we've talked a little bit about with some very colorful language, a lot of K sounds, and a lot of vulgarity, something that you wouldn't expect to come out of a governor, and something that, quite frankly, that you would want to do in person. Look, if you're that angry, you walk in the door, you close the door behind you, and you lay into them face to face. You never leave anything on a recorder. You never write anything down. It goes back to what my grandfather said when I was a kid. You never write anything down that you don't want your grandmother to read. You just don't. You don't write, and I guess recording would go to that as well. You don't put anything into a physical space that can be changed, that can be handed around. You don't write notes. You don't record messages. You don't do any of that stuff unless you want it to come and bite you in the behind. So this guy's got to know this. He's an older guy. He's got to be somewhat intelligent. I can't believe I just said that. There's got to be something there. You don't get to be that old being that dumb, but he did. He left a voicemail on this legislator's voicemail, and it got out. And he's gotten beat up over it. So I guess he was talking to the media, and he says, look, I may not supposed to be that sensitive to these things, but I am. He says, I lose sleep over this, and it's frustrating when you hear people talk about cheap political stunts to hurt their opponent and not to do the right thing. He goes on to say being called a racist was a horrible thing for me. It was enormously hurtful, and it hurt my family. And maybe that's true. I doubt it by some of the things that this guy has said that's come out of his mouth. This is the guy who talked about, as a kid, going beating up other kids for their Halloween candy and being very proud of the fact that he did that. But he goes on to say at this conference that he says, quote, "I will no longer speak to the press ever again after today." He said, and I'm serious. That's, when they're serious. I know when my kids do this when they have their temper tantrums. And my 7-year-old goes off, "I'm serious this time." And you go, okay, he's serious this time. He says everything will be put in writing. He says, I'm tired of being caught. The gotcha moments. There's no gotcha moment here. There's no gotcha. You made a call. You left a whole bunch of really rotten words and lots of vulgarity on this person's voicemail. There's no gotcha. And the thing that gets me is, I mean, the things that this guy has said is he's like an old curmudgeon uncle. He's like your crazy uncle who has these stereotypes and these generalizations. The one that wasn't too long ago, he said that he was ranting and raving about there were drug dealers coming from New York and Connecticut and impregnating young white girls. And you go, really? I'm sure there's a case of it, but is it that rampant that the governor is going to address it? He went on. He was also railing about immigrants in restaurants because he couldn't understand them. And just a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, during speeches, he would call protesters idiots and all kinds of stuff. He wrote a letter where he claimed that the southern half of the state of Maine was ignorant and that they ignore and welcome corruption. And one of my favorite ones, he told the NAACP to kiss his butt because they offered to have him come and speak, and he turned them down, and they weren't thrilled with him. And he said, "You kiss my butt." And you wonder why the press doesn't like him very much. My favorite one is that he wanted to blow up the state's largest newspaper while sitting in an F-35 Lightning II flight simulator. That was, I think, one of my favorite LePage things. But beyond that is all of the mean, angry, hateful stuff, kicking people off of welfare programs and all kinds of Tea Party stuff. But he says he may resign. He may step down. Tired of being caught. Yeah. I'll tell you the thing that upsets me the most about him. He took the labor mural off of the one of the Capitol buildings and threw it into storage. We don't want to recognize those working people. Screw them. Yeah, that's it. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It's coming.